like a hole in the head.
We will!
Oh, yes. They say that. Well, I mean, there'll be a hole in the schedule, I'll tell you. Right.
He mostly just sends me photos.
I will send Julia photos, so there we go. Anyway, I will be back in a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, the news is next at 6:30.
What gets too much airtime? Bland, beige, unopinionated dross. I think the British public want to be able to be of an opinion, want to be able to be involved. That's the great thing for me about Talk TV. People will be able to get involved. I just think that we misjudge the British public if we tell them the whole time what they should be thinking. I am sick and tired of watching television that tells you what you should be thinking, talks at you rather than with you.
This is Talk TV News.
Good morning, I'm Emily Rose Adams. Boris Johnson set to announce new measures to boost home ownership in a speech today. The Prime Minister is expected to extend the right to buy to those who currently rent from housing associations and plans for lowered paid workers to use housing benefits to buy homes. It comes days after Monday's no confidence vote in his leadership, in which 4 in 10 of his own MPs voted against him. The US House of Representatives has voted to raise the minimum age for buying semi-automatic guns from 18 to 21, although it's unlikely to pass through the US Senate and become law. The House heard testimony from survivors of last month's school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, in which 19 children and 2 teachers were killed. 11-year-old Mia Cerrillo described how she smeared blood on herself and pretended to be dead to stay safe.
He shot my friend that was next to me, and I thought he was going to come back to the room, so I grabbed the blood and I put it all over me.
Do you feel safe at school? Why not?
Because I don't want it to happen again.
A search is continuing for 2 people who went missing after their boat capsized on a lake in Devon. Emergency services rescued 2 people safely from the water at Rodeford Lake yesterday afternoon, and another 2 were taken to hospital in Plymouth. Police confirmed all those involved were local adults, and next of kin of those missing have been informed. And footballing icon and 3-time World Cup winner Pelé has joined calls for authorities to intensify their search for a British journalist missing in the Amazon rainforest. Dom Phillips and his Indigenous guide disappeared on Sunday, and it's understood he'd been threatened before going missing. Pelé said he had been moved by the disappearance. That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
I'm Julia Hartley Brewer, and this is the home of straight talking. What really makes me angry is injustice, when people don't get their fair shot at life, and some people get more than others just because they are there. Good morning to you. It's Thursday the 9th of June. You're watching Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley Brewer, on Talk TV. We are live from the Talk Radio studios. Coming up, the average family car now costs £100 to fill up with petrol, after the biggest daily rise yesterday in price in 17 years. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson will announce today that lower paid workers will be allowed to use their housing benefits to buy their own homes, in an extension to the Right to Buy scheme. And the first flight to Rwanda to deport Channel migrants could face long delays after lawyers launched a legal challenge. Imagine everyone's surprise. 6:33 is the time. This is Talk Breakfast. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Great to have your company. Goodness me, there's a lot to talk about. When don't I say that? Oh, may you live in boring times. That would be a wonderful thing, wouldn't it? Yeah, lots to talk about. Whether you are watching on Talk TV or listening on Talk Radio, it's great to have your company this morning. Joining me this morning also, I'm delighted to say, once again, is political commentator Ali Miraj. And Ali, we have got a lot to get our teeth into this morning.
It's not boring, is it?
It's not boring. It really isn't. I mean, there is so much. Let's just get straight into it. Cost of living. I mean, we're going to be talking about this for a very long time to come. Of course, I'm not sure the Prime Minister is very keen on people talking about this. So we're actually asking you this morning, before I get to you, Ali, the price of a tank of petrol for a family car will hit £100 today. We're asking, how will this affect you? Whether it's, getting to and from work, whether you can actually, afford to run your business, because, of course, this affects people, whether you're a plumber or an electrician, you're having to go back with your van. This affects everybody. I'd love to hear from you. Get in touch. Do tweet me at Talk TV. You can also get in touch much on text. Text 87222, put the word talk at the beginning. We'll get as many of your messages on air as possible. How will it affect you as the price of a tank of petrol for a family car hits £100 a day? It's already over that for diesel, as we discovered the other day. 120 quid it cost us on Saturday. But Ali, these sums are huge, aren't they?
They are huge, but we are in a dire fiscal position right now, Julia. I mean, the reality is we just came back on the back of COVID. We've spent $400 billion in borrowing on that. We've got $2 trillion of public debt, and we've got rising interest rates. This is really, really tough. We're seeing the war in Ukraine. People are being bombed out of their homes. This is our war here. This is a war that we're going to have to face.
And of course, what's happening in Ukraine, as we know, is also affecting us. That's the biggest impact in terms of the petrol and diesel prices. But also, of course, we know food supplies as well. These shortages of, whether it's sunflower oil or wheat, the effect on fertiliser. Again, all these exports from Russia and Ukraine, which are being massively impacted by that war and by sanctions. The reality is that the fuel price going up affects every single person in this country. People who don't own a car will be affected by this because every single thing that they buy in the supermarket is transported by lorry at some point, and that diesel and that petrol, most of these are diesel lorries, they are going to be affected. We spoke about this yesterday with a wholesalers representative, distribution representative, James Bilby, and he was to say, 40% increase in their costs. Huge part of the cost of the goods that we get is the transportation. What is the solution to this? I mean, we know Joe Biden has been trying to talk to the Saudis to increase their supplies. When you have an embargo on those Russian supplies, although actually, the Europeans aren't really doing much about that yet. They're still arguing over it. Can't get full agreement on it. What a surprise! But we don't actually rely on Russian oil and gas very much. And we're going to be dropping all of our support, all of our purchases of those by the end of the year. But the point is that even if we don't rely on it, the fact that there is an embargo means that every other supplier's prices are pushed up. Why are our allies supposedly in the Middle East? Why are they not upping their output? Why are they not just turning on the oil fields and just sending out far more so that we can see their price fall globally? That is a political decision by OPEC, by Saudis, by others, not to actually help the world out at this point. Is it time for the West to sort of basically say to the Middle East countries who've got oil, time to put up or shut up, pick a side? Because at the moment, you're helping Russia and not us.
Well, yeah, I mean, the West often tells people in the Middle East to pick a side. That's exactly what they did in Iraq. It didn't turn out too well. So I'm not sure that the Saudis are going to be putting up with bully boy tactics from the US, quite frankly, although you're right on the OPEC issue. They have been talks, and indeed Boris Johnson did a tour of the Middle East himself, trying to get the Saudis to increase output by 650,000 barrels a day. So OPEC may take more action there, but it wants to keep its price. It does not want volatility in the share price like in the 1970s. It does not want that. You're right, we've got a perfect confluence of issues here. The OECD is saying that growth next year is going to be, this year is going to be 3.6%, 0% next year. We've got rising inflation. They're predicting it's going to go into double digits. So there is a perfect storm here, Julia, and there is no easy answers. You're right to say that we are more insulated from energy imports from Russia than our European counterparts, but it is driven by the international price.
Yeah, and again, if we then buy things like gas, if we then buy liquefied natural gas from abroad, again, instead of the stuff that's sitting under large parts of north of England, shale gas sitting there, which we're refusing to frack.
Well, the US was meant to actually be releasing a lot of their strategic reserves to try and bring down the price, right? So they've also got a role to play here. But if you've got a situation where you've got a war going on, and you've also now got the EU announced only in the last few days that 90% of seaborne oil would be phased out. I mean, you've had Hungary against it because they're very reliant on Russian energy, and also Viktor Orban has taken a very different view within the EU about the whole Russia policy, frankly. And then you've also got the gas issue as well, where Frans Timmermans, the EU commissioner, was saying that they were going to try and reduce gas imports into the EU by 2/3 by the end of the year. All this is going to have an impact.
Yeah.
Of course it is. Absolutely.
It certainly is. I mean, you mentioned that OECD report. This is the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, major international body, and they looked at predictions for how the economies are going to do. The G20 economies, the biggest economies in the world, and they predicted that next year that the UK economy, our growth is going to grind to a halt, such as the growth we've actually got. We've actually been one of the highest growing economies in certainly the G7, but we are going to be basically the worst, apart from Russia, which is undergoing major international sanctions at the moment, next year, among all the G20 countries. Why is that?
Well, it's a confluence of facts. They're partly saying that there are Brexit-related issues as well. We know there are issues with supply chains. But they're also calling, quite interestingly, for tax cuts. Now, that will really cheer people on the right of the Tory party.
So they're basically saying that this attempt to sort of contract the public spending, and that is actually part of the problem.
That's right. But that's exactly what they're saying. But they're also saying you should cut taxes. But the problem is, Julia, we have got a dire fiscal position, and I just don't feel that people have woken up to this. You know my view. I believe that people on the poorest in society should have been helped, and I think Rishi Sunak's recent announcement that he was doing that was right.
And most of that help was for the very poorest.
Yes, but I disagree with the £400 that was given to other people, frankly, because some people in the country, look, we're all suffering, but we're not all equally suffering.
No, but there is an issue in terms of payments going out to households and we know there's always a trade-off between, when you means test things, the bureaucracy and the cost and the time of that can actually outweigh the extra money that people are getting, and so there's often a trade from that. But yeah, I'm of the view I shouldn't be given any help by the government right now. I don't need it.
But it was
give it to people who need it.
It was a sop to southern Tory voters where they're worried about the Lib Dems coming into those seats like Winchester and Esher and Walton, Dominic Raab's seat, all these kind of places. They wanted to give them some red meat there, but it wasn't really needed.
But this is the key thing. A lot of this we're going to talk about this major housing announcement. We're going to be talking to the Levelling Up and Housing Secretary Michael Gove coming up later on the show. And we're going to be talking about Rwanda as well. But a lot of these things, they're all these sort of meaty things. The red meat policies we were told would really appeal to those Tory voters and wavering red wall voters to keep them on side. And these are the sort of policies that are going to shore up the Prime Minister's position after that vote of confidence, but 41% voting no confidence. But the reality is, all of these policies, we'll come to the housing policy, but they're all going to be dwarfed by the cost of living crisis, because we're all going to continue to feel poorer for the rest of this year and next year, and there's going to be a general election realistically in 2024. We're not going to feel better off by then.
That's right, we're not. And the Prime Minister is meant to be making a speech where he's going to be talking again about using fiscal firepower to help people. Where is the fiscal firepower coming from?
OK, well, we're going to be talking more about that, all of that coming up. Plenty more besides. Look at the front pages. 6:41 is the time. This is Talk Breakfast. morning to you once again. This is Talk Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley Brewer, whether you are watching on Talk TV, listening on Talk Radio. Great to have your company. 6:45 is the time. Political commentator Ali Miraj is also joining me this morning. Delighted to have you in the studio. We've been talking about the cost of living and the horrors ahead, and they really are horrors. Boris Johnson, they're very keen to get on with the job, he told us, didn't he, on Tuesday. And one of the big things we've been told we were going to hear about was a big housing announcement. Given that the government has pledged to build hundreds of thousands of more homes by a year, well, I think is it 300,000 a year by 2024? So they could build none whatsoever, but in 2024 they can build 300,000. Then that would count as fulfilling the policy. It doesn't touch the sides of the need. But two things here in terms of revising Margaret Thatcher's flagship policy of the right to buy, launched in 1980. Very controversial policy. People being able to buy their council homes. A lot of those things have been sold off to private landlords. And an awful lot of people making, a good hit on that. But in a speech in Lancashire today, Boris Johnson is going to, two things. He's going to extend the right to buy for council tenants from not just council tenants to housing association tenants as well, but also allowing people for the first time to use their benefits, particularly their housing benefit payments, to help buy their homes and pay their monthly mortgage payments. Currently, you're not allowed to use housing benefit to pay a mortgage. Is this the solution to the housing crisis that we have, Ali?
No.
Move on. Okay. I mean,
no. What it is, Julia, and I think you probably know this. It's been a tough few days for Boris Johnson. 148 of his colleagues voted against him. He wants to move the agenda on, and this is one of those things which is it's succeeding. It's on the front page of the Times today. The reality is that we need to see exactly what is being proposed. It doesn't seem to be well thought through at all. Look, I'm all in favour of people in Britain have this innate desire, and I fully understand and respect and applaud it, to want to own their own home. An Englishman's home is his castle. Great. I fully agree, and we want to help people do that. How is this actually going to work? And also, you mentioned...
just silly technical questions. But you know what? You would last 5 minutes in number 10 as a policy advisor. How is this going to work, Prime Minister? And everyone will look at you and go, Ali, stop being so negative.
Well, exactly why I didn't go and work there. But the point is, look, right to buy was a flagship policy, and I think it was a good policy. The bad part of it was...
selling off all our council
Exactly. Store. They did never replenish the housing stock.
It's not just never replenished. They were banned by law. Any money that councils got, selling at a discount to people, they were banned from building more social housing. We have far less social housing than most other comparable European countries.
Well, this is the fundamental problem that you're... And it's not just social housing. We've got just we don't have enough housing, full stop.
Yeah. And this is the issue, isn't it? Because you know where you're a regular listener or watcher. You know where I'm going with this. Get ready, because we'll put down your cornflakes, your cup of tea. We're going to all say it together, aren't we? The solution to the housing problem in this country is not making it a bit easier, tinkering at the edges for this or that person or these group of people to be able to buy a home. It is to, all together now, build more houses. We've had an influx of millions of people to this country. Millions of people, thankfully, are living longer. We've also got more people, living longer on their own before they have families, more divorced families. All of these things together, each one individually, but put them all together, contribute to having a need to far more housing. And we've barely built any houses for decades now.
That's right. There's a real issue with housing supply, and also, Julia, because of that, with the cost of housing. You've got people now living in a home well into their 30s, not being able to buy a house. And in fact, now renting becoming endemic in a thing. And if you want to rent, that's fine. And I think on the continent,
many European countries, that's completely the norm.
Exactly. But this is why I started by saying, philosophically, in our DNA, we're in a different place, right? And I don't think people should be condemned for wanting to own their own home. The reality is we've not built enough homes. And when the government was trying to grasp this nettle under the previous Housing Secretary, Robert Jenrick, you remember all those issues with the algorithm and whether houses were going to be built and protecting the green belt. And I've got to declare, look, Julia, I'm Vice President of CPRE, the Countryside Charity. We're also very nervous about housing going in the wrong places.
Oh, yeah, but we're not. No one's talking about building houses on rolling hills.
Well, sometimes you've got to be careful about that. But in general, we do need more housing, and there's plenty of places they can be built.
Exactly. There are plenty of brownfield sites that could be used. No question at all. I mean, God, they're building housing round my way. You wouldn't believe. I mean, every spare spot of land. If you can see a railway line, they are building a massive block of flats next to it. But this is the thing. The problem with people who, I mean, this is specifically about people abusing housing benefit to buy. If you are on such low income that you are needing the rest of us taxpayers to top up your rent. I mean, we know private rents are very high. Again, private rents are very high because there's a shortage of housing. People can't afford to buy. People would normally have bought, so would have been able to buy 20 years ago, are now in the private rental market. They can't afford. The rents go up. Landlords, they're making a living. That's what they're doing. I don't criticise them for that. They're going with the market rates. And so you see those rents go up and up and up. So more and more people are on housing benefit. I mean, it's a huge £30 billion we're spending now every year of our money. It's topping up those payments effectively to private landlords. But if you are needing the government, your fellow taxpayers, to help you with pay your rent, the idea that you are in a position to buy your own home is frankly laughable. I mean, it's absurd. It's insulting. What do those people do when the boiler breaks? They won't have the money. What do they do, if there's, any other basic problems with their home? They're not going to be able to manage it. What we need is to have affordable homes that people can't afford, so they don't need to be on housing benefit, and people not to be paid a wage where if you work if there's two of you and you work 40 hours a week, you should be able to afford to rent a home that's appropriate to your family. Not if you've got 8 kids. If you've got 8 kids, frankly, that's your own problem. But if you've got 2 kids, 2 parents working, you should be able to afford a home. Simple as that.
Well, look, you're absolutely right. But you mentioned private landlords, by the way. Even the rules were changed around that. So that's not a walk in the park either, no. By the way, right? Because the tax benefits have been reduced. I'm not saying we should be bleeding our hearts for private landlords, but they were reduced. So it's not a walk in the park there, and they're also providing a service. Now, on the actual fundamental point here, you're right. What we should be actually trying to do is increase the housing stock, number one. Number two, we should be doing more shared ownership schemes so that over time people can build up equity. Now, that was being looked at some point, right? But simply reducing the housing stock in this way, we're not building enough homes already. Allowing people on housing benefits who are already struggling. But the other thing is, it's not really equitable or fair, because there's a lot of people who aren't on housing benefits, Julia, who you and I both know, who are struggling.
I'm thinking of so many people I know who, in their 20s, early 30s, who just say you can see no point when, unless you've got bank of mum and dad, that you're going to be able to get the housing ladder. Let's also talk about another big topic today. It's the front of one of the... I mean, that story, Johnson to let benefit claimants buy homes, on the front of the Times. The £100 to fill up a tank of petrol on the front of the Mirror, and that fuel cost surge, on the front of the Guardian. Telegraph, price of filling up an average car hits £100. The Mail, though, have got these legal challenges to those flights to take Channel migrants, suspected illegal immigrants, some asylum seekers, of course, to take those to Rwanda. The first flight due to go 14th of June, so next week. I don't think anyone really thought it was going to happen. But Priti Patel's first migrants flight to Rwanda was in doubt last night, they say, after legal actions were launched against it. A coalition of charities and a trade union that represents Border Force staff have applied for an injunction to halt next Tuesday's operation. They're also seeking a judicial review of the policy. We see appeals, I mean, even now in the current system for deporting even foreign criminals. I mean, someone who's come to this country who then commits murder, and then when they finally finish their sentence, they're going to be let out of jail. They are then going to be deported. We even see legal challenges against those people. And so these people, of course, just, they're claiming asylum. A legal challenge against this. Do you think, A, these flights are ever going to happen, and B, is this actually what the Prime Minister wanted? Is this what Home Secretary Priti Patel wanted, which is to announce his policy, very popular with a lot of sort of heartland Tory voters and lots of Red Wall voters as well, and actually it's going to show a real sort of culture war battle with Labour and the left, which is and the human rights lawyers, and actually it's these front pages that they want rather than the actual policy to work?
Well, I think more fundamentally than that, maybe an element of that, Julia, but more fundamentally, we need an asylum system that works and is not abused, because we have always had in this country a policy of helping people who are genuinely fleeing persecution. Think about the Ugandan Asians who fled under the regime of Idi Amin, right? So this is not something about being small-hearted. But if you've got a situation where 30,000 people, arrived last year. Again, the numbers might be higher this year. Summer's now here, finally, and the weather's better. I
think we're already at 10,000, aren't we? And most of the people arrive in the summer. So.
But also the other thing is, a lot of people arriving are single men, right? And if you're genuinely feeling persecution, I always find it slightly odd to think that you would leave your family behind in a refugee camp or wherever they are.
Yeah.
I always find it slightly odd. Now, some people have said that that's completely heartless and I'm wide of the mark. But please explain. And the lawyers who are bringing these cases, and certain people of the left who are crying foul on this, What is the solution?
Yeah.
What is the solution?
Oh,
we
but
spent
you know,
50 million to the
I'll tell you
French
what their solution is. Yeah, their solution. Those lawyers.
What, people dying in dinghies?
They're entitled. Look, they're entitled to make legal challenges. We have the rule of law in this country. I've got no issue with that. And if the policy isn't legal, well then, okay, you have to have a vote in Parliament to change that policy. Then I don't know. But the key thing for me is the reason they're going to be challenging it is they fundamentally don't think anyone should be deported. These are people who believe there is no such thing as a border. These are the people who have on their Twitter bio and their little description of themselves as a global citizen or citizen of nowhere. The reason why they're anti-Brexit because that's horrible because it's a nation state asserting itself. They believe that we should basically open our doors to everyone in the world. I mean, frankly, I think they're insane. I think they're immoral. I think they don't understand the concept of civil society if you think you can just have open borders everywhere. But that's why they're challenging it.
But how do people on minimum wage in this country, how do they feel about this?
Yeah,
Right?
Exactly. Well,
and by the way, Julia, it's not just to preserve certain people on the left, but certain people on the right also don't believe in borders as well.
Yeah, there is that as well. Look, there's so much more to talk about. We are going to be talking to the Housing and Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove. We'll talk to him about that housing policy and, of course, bring in Rwanda and, of course, the cost of petrol as well. Also got talks to avert the rail strikes, which are due to come up later this month. We'll be seeing if they actually get it anywhere at all. Lots more to talk about, including the trans woman cyclist Emily Bridges, who says she doesn't want they don't want special treatment to be allowed to race against women. And, of course, more on Ukraine and that massive impact that we're going to be seeing from the Ukraine war, not just on our petrol prices, our fuel prices, but also on global food supplies as well. That is all coming up. It's a very, very, very busy morning ahead. Oh, yes, talking to Lisa Nandy as well, Michael Gove's shadow. So do stay tuned. This is Talk Breakfast.
On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 7.
Good morning, I'm Emily Rose Adams. Boris Johnson is set to announce new measures to boost home ownership in a speech today. The Prime Minister is expected to extend the right to buy to those who currently rent from housing associations and plans for lower paid workers to use housing benefits to buy homes. It comes just days after Monday's confidence vote in his leadership, in which 4 in 10 of his own MPs voted against him. Sadiq Khan has warned that more violent crime could be committed because of the cost of living crisis. New figures show knife and gun crimes reduced by almost a fifth in 2021, but the Mayor of London says that trend could be reversed as soaring prices worsen deprivation and poverty. It says the average cost of filling up a family car is expected to have reached £100 for the first ever time, with official figures released later today. And the British Chamber of Commerce warns Britain's economic growth will slow this year. A search is continuing for 2 people who went missing after their boat capsized on a lake in Devon. Emergency services rescued 2 people safely from the water at Rodeford Lake yesterday afternoon, and another 2 were taken to hospital in Plymouth. Police confirmed all those involved were local adults, and next of kin of those missing had been informed. An 11-year-old survivor of last month's school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, that killed 19 children and 2 teachers has told U.S. officials how she smeared blood on herself and pretended to be dead to stay safe.
He shot my friend that was next to me, and I thought he was going to come back to the room, so I grabbed the blood and put it all over me.
Do you feel safe at school? Why not?
Because I don't want it to happen again.
It's as the U.S. House of Representatives last night voted for a series of gun control measures, including raising the minimum age for buying semi-automatic guns from 18 to 21, although it's almost certain not to pass through the U.S. Senate and become law. Plans to deport dozens of illegal migrants to Rwanda from next week could be halted after a legal challenge in the High Court. Under the planned government policy, people who are in the UK unlawfully will be sent to the East African nation for processing. Government insiders have admitted the chances of the first flight taking off next week are now very low. And footballing icon and 3-time World Cup winner Pelé has joined calls for authorities to intensify their search for a British journalist missing in the Amazon rainforest. Dom Phillips and his Indigenous guide disappeared on Sunday, and it's understood he'd been threatened before going missing. A vigil's being held outside the Brazilian embassy in London this morning. And now it's time for today's weather.
Business sponsors Talk TV weather.
Hello, I'm Nazanin Gaffer. Wet and windy weather from the west over the next few days. We are seeing the remnants of Tropical Storm Alex heading towards northern parts of the UK through Friday and Saturday. It's going to bring very windy conditions there. And interestingly, over the next few days, we are also going to see high or very high pollen levels due to the fact that it's going to turn increasingly windy, but also temperatures are going to be rising, especially across southern areas. And we've seen quite a lot of rain recently. As a result, that means there's a lot of grass about, and lots of grass pollen levels are going to be high too, mainly across England and Wales. So for today, we are starting off mostly fine and dry, but out towards the southwest, it's already cloudy with some patchy outbreaks of rain. Cloudy across parts of the north as well, brighter further south. That band of rain will be moving its way eastwards through today, mainly reaching central and western parts of the UK, where it will be mostly cloudy with some patchy outbreaks of rain. But across eastern Scotland and eastern parts of England, it looks mostly fine and bright. Then for Friday and for Saturday, as I mentioned, we are going to see the remnants of Tropical Storm Alex approaching northern parts of the UK. It's going to bring very windy conditions across these areas, choppy waters, gales likely around parts of the coast, but calmer across parts of the south, mainly dry and bright.
Sunday Times Culture sponsors Talk TV weather.
I think the topic that I'd like more people to be thinking about is definitely health and social care. You know, we have an outrageous system where we don't look after our elderly in the way we should. We've got to have a proper grown-up and honest conversation about that.
Good morning to you. It's Thursday the 9th of June. You're watching Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley Brewer, on Talk TV. We are live from the Talk Radio studios. Coming up, the average family car now costs £100 to fill up with petrol after the biggest daily price jump in 17 years. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson will announce today that lower-paid workers will be allowed to use their housing benefits to buy their own homes in an extension of the Right to Buy scheme. And the first flights to Rwanda to deport Channel migrants could face long delays. Imagine everyone's surprise after lawyers launched legal challenges. At the time right now is 7:05. This is Talk Breakfast. Thank you very much indeed for your company. If you are just tuning in, great to have your company on Talk TV. If you're watching, if you're listening on Talk Radio, thank you very much indeed as well. Also, big thank you to political commentator Ali Murad. She's joining me. We've already got into a lot of the meaty stories today. All of those three stories, frankly, on their own, will be enough to keep us busy for the next 3 hours. Not to mention the small matter of an international report predicting the UK is going to have the worst growth of the G20, except for Russia. And they've got economic sanctions against them. So what's our excuse? Well, we're going to put some of those questions and all those topics to Michael Gove, the Levelling Up and Housing Secretary, a bit later in the show. He'll be on the show. And also his opposite number, Lisa Nandy, for Labour as well. Lots more top guests coming up, including Ian Duncan-Smith, the former Tory party leader, about Boris Johnson's woes and whether or not things like the Rwanda migrant flights and whether or not the housing announcement that's going to come today, and we'll talk about that in a moment, whether or not that will actually boost up Boris Johnson and indeed the Tory party's support, particularly ahead of those by-elections coming up later this month, whether that's going to be enough when you're looking at things like the cost of living and the cost of petrol. Ali, before we go to our political editor on all of this, £100 to fill up a typical car, fill up a tank. Yesterday saw a 2 pence and a bit rise, the biggest daily jump in the price of petrol in 17 years. Filling up a tank of a typical car of diesel, it's already over 100 quid, I think it's about 102 already. These are the sort of numbers. But a 2 pence rise doesn't make much difference in the big scheme of things. But this is a very symbolic price rise, isn't it? £100.
It is, and people are really struggling across the country. Everyone is at the moment, and unfortunately we're going to continue to do so. I don't see any immediate change occurring to this at all. It's going to be a really tough 2 years. Now, the reality is politicians are not going to be honest about that because they have to win elections. But we are in a dire situation right now. The government has tried to give a 5p reduction on fuel duty. Not all four courts are passing that on. There's an investigation going to happen now.
No, it was eaten up in the first week by the petrol rises that went ahead anyway.
Well, look, some of these people are not passing it on. The Competition and Markets Authority is doing an investigation to make sure that, it is. But 5p here, there, it's not going to make much difference. The reality is things are going to be really tough. No one is squaring with the public. And the problem is, Julia, the poorest in society should be helped, but we cannot get hooked on the opium of public spending indefinitely. Yeah. We've got the governor of the Bank of England saying that he's helpless. He needs to raise interest rates, by the way, which he's also needs to get on and do, and that is tough, but it needs to happen. Mervyn King, the former governor of the Bank of England, has called on the bank to get on with that.
Bad for people with mortgages, good for people who are living off their savings.
Indeed, so that needs to happen. And then on the other side, I mean, all this talk about tax cuts at the moment, well, let's see, but personally, for me, it doesn't make sense.
But again, if you're promising tax cuts after just raising taxes, are you just getting us back to normal? Well, again, we're going to raise all of that with Michael Gove later in the show. Right, now let's talk about all of that with our political editor, Peter Cardwell. Good morning to you, Peter.
Good morning, Julia.
I mean, there is so much meat around. We had this talk about the red meat policies that Number 10 was going to throw out to not just shore up the blue wall, the traditional long-time Tory supporter, but also those brand new red wall former Labour voters in the Midlands and the north of the country, both of whom we've got a by-election in the southwest, and we've got a by-election in Wakefield coming up in the next couple of weeks, and Tories looking like could lose both of those seats. There's going to be a lot of focus on this cost of filling up a typical car. The cost of living story, that is, no matter what the government announces, that is the one that's going to dominate constantly, isn't it? Because that is what affects every single person in this country every single day.
Yes, indeed, and 80% of people getting to work this morning in a car. There are lots of people making decisions about where to go, whether to bring their kids to after-school activities, whether to go and visit elderly relatives, because it costs so much now. £100 to fill a car. Cast your mind back to 2022 years ago when there were the fuel protests which brought this country to a standstill. That was because it cost £50 to fill up a Mondeo, a normal family car. And now it's twice that. So it's a really crazy amount of money. The government will argue there are loads of global factors involved in this. They're trying to name and shame forecourts that are not passing on the 5p reduction. But when it happens in the last sort of 24, 48 hours, it's gone up by 2p anyway.
What difference does that make? Yeah, yeah. Well, we're asking on Twitter and on text message today, the price of a tank of petrol for a family car hitting £100 today. How will this affect you? So I want to hear from people. I want to know, affecting you getting to and from work, affecting people taking their kids to school, whether or not, as you say, people can't visit family, affecting crucially also people's businesses as well, their livelihoods, people looking for work. And people can tweet it in. Love to hear from you at Talk TV, or you can text me on 87222. Put the word talk at the beginning. Let me just put this one to you, Peter. This is from JB, who says, we're filling up a tank of petrol. Mine hit £100 last month. I was almost out of fuel yesterday. I put in £30 worth and got 100 miles. I get 400 miles from a full tank, so that would now cost me £120. I'm disabled, but my car is going up for sale as I can't afford it. I'll have to get used to being housebound.
That's heartbreaking, and those are the kind of decisions that so many people are going to be making, and they'll be calculating the cost of going somewhere, of going on that shopping trip, of going to visit that relative, these are big things. People have been in a lockdown for 2 years, for goodness sake. We want to get out and about, and this is just so expensive, and there's so many factors that are dealing with this. The government's trying to do something about it. There are global factors as well. Ukraine isn't helping, but the cost of fuel just continues to go up. And it's not just what we put in our cars, it's what we heat our homes with as well.
And every single thing that's transported, everything we buy, this is hitting every single person. And again, you don't even have to own a car. This is going to be hitting you. You'll be paying the cost of this. These costs are being passed on by manufacturers and suppliers and delivery people. The OECD, an international body, yesterday, they put out, as they do, regular reports on growth, and they're predicting among the G20 countries, the 20 richest countries in the world, that the UK is going to have the worst growth other than Russia. Now, Russia is being hit by massive economic sanctions from around the world right now. Why have we got second worst growth of all the G20 countries? The government, I think the Prime Minister even yesterday at PMQs was crowing about, the record of growth we've had in the last year. What on earth is going on?
Yes, indeed. I think we have. It's really interesting. We have a government. We have a Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, who calls himself a Thatcherite, says he wants to cut taxes. We've got the highest taxes for 71 years. If we borrow more, which we're probably going to do, we are going to do, because of the windfall tax is only going to raise $5 billion. Even the spending commitments of the last couple of weeks are another $12 billion that are going to end up with more borrowing. So that's going to push up the amount of money we owe. If interest rates go up, if inflation continues to go up as it will, servicing that debt, paying off the debt, will cost even more as well, which will just add to the pressures on the economy as well. So we're in this kind of spiral, which is very, very difficult for growth.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, leave aside all the impacts on food supplies from the Russia and Ukraine situation. Let's also talk about what the Prime Minister is going to announce today. He's doing a speech in Lancashire. We don't know the location yet. Obviously, we're rather worried about protesters. He's used to getting booed now, we understand. He said, he wanted to get on with the job, things that matter to people. He's making a new housing announcement. We're going to be talking to the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, about those later in the show. But this is basically extending the Thatcherite right to buy policy from people who are not just living in council homes, but also those in housing associations, but also, and I've got to say, I think this is one of the most bizarre policy announcements I've ever seen, allowing people to use their housing benefit payments, so your and my money that is topping up people on low wages to pay their rent to a private landlord, to help buy their own homes and make monthly mortgage payments. I genuinely don't think I've heard of a more stupid policy in my life.
You're not a fan. Well, it's interesting because there are a lot of people who have enough money to pay a mortgage, often slightly lower actually than some rents, but at the same time they don't have enough money for a deposit. So if you live in a council home, the government's logic argues that you should get this reduction up to 70% of the value of the property, depending on how long you've been living there. And what the government wants to do is turn sort of generation rent, people under 35 who really can't get on the housing ladder, into generation buy.
I don't understand that. This is absurd. I mean, again, lots of people in housing association homes, that's largely, it's supposed to be, because they need extra help. I'm of the view that if you're in a position, you're a bit better off now, then maybe you should be leaving that home to someone who needs it more. But the idea that people who are on low enough incomes that the rest of us are having to top up their pay with housing benefits to cover their rent, the idea that those people should be in a position to buy their own home when there are millions of people who are paying their own way who can't afford to buy a home. I mean, I'm sorry. I think you're going to anger more people than you're going to please.
Yeah, it's interesting. This policy could affect up to 4 million people, but they've capped it. In theory, if all those sort of 4 million households rather than people, I should say, want to buy their homes, it could cost the government up to something like 3 billion, but they've capped it at $500 million. But certainly something to get into with Michael Gove when you talk to him a bit later on.
Well, again, what we need to do is build more homes so we increase demand to meet supply. But also, given that you can't claim any housing benefits, any benefits at all, if you've got more than £16,000 in savings at all. Well, if you've got £16,000 in savings, you're not going to be on a housing benefit. You'd need £16,000 in savings, realistically, to be able to put a deposit down for a home anyway.
Probably at the very least, yeah, exactly. So it is a strange policy, but it's one the government hopes will capture the imagination. Hopes people will say, actually, the government's on my side. And Boris Johnson wanting to reset this week after his troubles earlier in the week with the confidence.
I genuinely think if the government really, really believes this is the sort of policy that is going to get them out of hot water, that I think they're in cloud cuckoo land. I really do. And let's talk about Rwanda, though. This is definitely the sort of policy the government is hoping those headlines will help them. Not just the announcement of that a plan to send channel migrants, asylum seeker applicants over to Rwanda, not just for processing, but also for resettlement if they are found to be legitimate asylum seekers. Lefty human rights lawyers up in arms, and what a surprise, not a surprise at all, that next week's first flight planned on the 14th of June, on the Tuesday. Lawyers have sent so many challenges to this, applying for an injunction and a judicial review of the policy. It looks like that flight won't go off. Front page of the Mail, lawyers set to ground first Rwanda flight. The government will be relishing that headline, won't they?
Yes, they will. All of this is very helpful to the government. The announcement of the policy in the first place was very helpful. All the left, as you say, up in arms saying, how dare you do this? This is appalling. And so many people actually saying, hold on a second, I think this sounds like a good idea. Those scenes of people coming across in small boats, people coming here who shouldn't be here, and now the attempts to stop them being sent to Rwanda. We're talking about small numbers as well. We're talking about probably fewer than a dozen people at the moment anyway. So certainly this whole row helps the government, helps Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, and helps Boris Johnson, who wants this to look as if he's really tough on illegal immigration and illegal asylum seekers. And this doesn't hurt him at all.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Always good to talk to you, political editor Talk Radio, Peter Carwell. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up next, we're going to be talking about that extraordinary testimony we heard at congressional hearings yesterday from the survivors of the Uvalde mass shooting at a school, where also one of the little girls who survived by smearing her classmates' blood on her, so the gunman thought she was already dead. Absolutely shocking story, that. 7:17 is the time. More from Ali Miraj as well. This is Talk Breakfast. Good morning to you. This is Talk Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley Brewer. The time is 7:21. Thank you very much indeed for joining me, whether you're watching on Talk TV or listening on Talk Radio. It's great to have your company. Great to hear from you as well. Do get in touch. We're asking you this morning, as the price of a tank of petrol for a family car, if you want to fill it up, will cost £100 from today. Some people are already getting in touch saying it's already cost more than that, but this is for a typical average family car. I want to know how this will affect you. What's it going to stop you from doing? What are you going to have to cut back on in other areas of your life to be able to afford the petrol that you need, no doubt, to get to and from work, get the kids to and from school, visit family? We've already heard from JB, who's disabled, and says they're going to have to basically give up their car because they can't afford it and be housebound. So do get in touch. You can tweet me at Talk TV. You can also text the word talk and then your message to 87222. We'll get as many of those on air as we can. Ali Maraj is still joining me. He's a political commentator. Ali, I don't know if you saw yesterday these hearings in the United States, in Washington, congressional hearings about gun control. Such a bitter, divided issue in the United States, but particularly following last month's attack on a school in Uvalde in Texas. 19 children, primary school-aged children, shot dead by a gunman, later shot dead by police. 2 teachers died. Also, the husband of one of those teachers then having a heart attack. I think the extra victim of this horrible crime. The testimony we heard was absolutely harrowing, wasn't it?
It was awful, absolutely awful, and no child should have to go to school and fear for their lives.
Could you imagine if our kids did that? If I went, well, bye-bye, good luck today in your exams, hope you don't get shot dead.
Yeah, but the thing is, look, Julia, we had a shooting here in Dunblane many years ago, and actions were taken after that to tighten up gun laws. Between 1967 and 2017 in the US, 1.5 million people have died as a result of shootings, right? Various shootings. How many more times is it going to go on? Columbine, Sandy Hook. I mean,
I realised when they didn't take action, when all those children, was it 20 children killed in the Sandy Hook mass shooting, 5, 6, 7-year-olds. If you don't take action, then you never take an action, are you? Well, let's talk to Greg Swenson, who's a spokesman for Republicans overseas. Good morning to you, Greg.
Hello, Julia.
Now, your party obviously getting an awful lot of heat for being so opposed to any sort of gun control of any sort, including, hey, maybe we don't allow people who've got a really strong, long-standing criminal record for violence or major mental health problems from buying a gun. So they could, an assault rifle, they can just mass shoot, dozens of children. I mean, do you think the party that you represent, do you think they're right on this policy?
Well, I think they're right on the policy. What I think is difficult is that everyone is making it sound like Republicans are not for gun laws or any kind of laws, and it's actually quite the opposite. I mean, there are plenty of gun laws on the books which are not being enforced. 88% of gun owners in America bought the guns because they fear for themselves. Yeah. They fear that they're not being defended by the police.
And gun ownership has actually gone up in recent years.
Absolutely. 68%, up 68% in 2021 by African Americans because they fear for their lives. So if laws were enforced and people didn't fear for their lives going out in the street, perhaps they wouldn't be buying guns, but it's their right to defend themselves. So what do you want?
But again, it's the fact that people feel the need that they need a gun to defend themselves. Yeah, I mean, again, this idea that, oh, good guy with a gun is...
Yeah, I know. I get it, Julia.
Okay,
but the reality is people are fearful because they are not being protected. What happened in that school is tragic. Nobody endorses that, obviously. That's an average weekend in Chicago.
Yeah, no, this is true. Although, again, when we look at the numbers of deaths, we should allow for the fact that actually an awful lot of those deaths are, I mean, not even half, but an awful lot, I think a third, are actually either accidents or suicides in the home. I mean, main reason not to have a gun in your home is you're most likely to be the victim of that gun, that realistically. But let's have a little listen. I mean, it's a very short clip, but I think we have to listen to this. This is a clip of Mia Cirio. She is the little 11-year-old. This is a video that was recorded to be played at these congressional hearings. And she told how she survived that mass shooting in her primary school.
He shot my friend that was next to me, and I thought he was going to come back to the room, so I grabbed the blood and I put it all over me.
I mean, Greg, the thought that my child could be at school And
It's sad.
I mean, she said earlier, she said that she watched the gunman walk up to the teacher and say good night, shoot her in the head. The teacher had already got the girls and boys to hide, under their desks and behind their bags. And then she watched as her classmates were shot dead, blood everywhere. And she, she was just caught up in that. And she took the blood of her classmate, smeared it on her and played it. It's harrowing.
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, obviously school shootings are particularly disturbing. This street violence happens every weekend or every day in Chicago, and it just doesn't really make the headlines, and it's a shame that it doesn't. And children die constantly on the streets there. They can't go outside. Parents are keeping them inside, or, and when the shootings start, they hide in the bathtub. Laws are not being enforced. I think we saw maybe the beginning of the end, Julia, yesterday, when the DA in San Francisco was actually not just voted out of office, but he was recalled in a recall election, which is very rare in the U.S. to actually recall an elected politician. But he wasn't enforcing laws. He was a radical progressive leftist that decided criminals shouldn't be prosecuted.
There is no doubt. I mean, there are so many major problems going on in America. I really think your country is teetering on the edge, frankly. The idea that America is the leader of the free world now is frankly a load of nonsense in terms of a lot of the laws that you've got, and indeed the laws that aren't being enforced. And Black Lives Matter, and defund the police, and actually, it's the poorest people, and largely, weirdly, it's black people who actually end up in the poorest neighbourhoods losing out the most. But is the answer for more people to have guns? I mean, the answer surely should be, at least a part of it, that you need to have proof, you're you're not mentally ill, to prove you haven't got a criminal record. Surely these are really basic things that no legitimate gun owner in the United States could really seriously question.
Of course. I think you're right. Common sense gun laws are absolutely perfectly acceptable.
Your party's blocking you.
No, that's not true, Julia. They're not. They're not blocking common sense policies. They're making sure that bureaucrats aren't deciding who can buy a gun to defend themselves rather than the people.
What average 18-year-old needs to have a gun to defend, needs to have a semi-automatic weapon to defend themselves?
Plenty of 18-year-olds in the United States Marines armed with weapons, which is a good thing because they're great patriots. However, let's be careful about that. Next, it'll be 18 to 21-year-olds can't vote. How will the progressives...
Oh, for goodness sake. Now, this is this most ridiculous argument. No,
that's not ridiculous.
No, the argument that an 18-year-old with a mental health problem shouldn't be allowed to buy a mass-killing weapon is... The fact that you can turn that into maybe we'll take away their votes.
Why are you arguing with me when we don't disagree on that?
We do disagree,
We agree, Julia. What you're wrong about is that we're against those laws when the laws are already on the books. They're just not being enforced by the radical progressive left. So let's just be clear that we are not against common sense gun legislation. So what you read in the headlines and Matthew McConaughey, that's really emotional, and I can understand why you get upset about it. I have children too, and I sent my daughter to public school for 4 years. The place was like locked down every day.
Well, Greg, we are going to have to agree to disagree on this, and we need to go to a news break. But Greg Spencer, Republican overseeing spokesman, really briefly from Ali Miraj. I mean, the Republicans are blocking common sense laws.
Of course they are, and a lot of them in the pocket of the National Rifle Association.
Not in the pocket; they're being threatened by a lot of them.
Well, indeed.
Basically,
we're just waiting for another school shooting.
Of course we will, and another one will be along very, very soon. That's the awful tragedy, isn't it? We're going to be talking next about that right to buy. That's up next here on Talk Breakfast.
What was my biggest career moment? After spending about 25 years at Fleet Street, there's loads of stories I could tell you. But actually, I think I did an overnight show for Talk Radio in the early days, the night of the Brexit referendum. And that was actually quite a milestone because, of course, we started off thinking that Remain had won. And at 2:30, 2:45, after Nigel Farage had already said he'd lost, it turned out he hadn't lost. And it turned out we were leaving the European Union. So that was quite shocking.
This is Talk TV News.
Good morning, I'm Emily Rose Adams. The average cost of filling up a family car is expected to have reached £100 for the first ever time, with official figures released later today. It comes as the British Chamber of Commerce warns Britain's economic growth will slow this year, while inflation is set to rise by 10% by the final quarter of 2022. Well, Talk Radio's political editor Peter Cardwell says government support hasn't gone far enough.
The government will argue there are loads of global factors involved in this. They're trying to name and shame four courts that are not passing on the 5p reduction. But when it happens in the last sort of 24, 48 hours, it's gone up by 2p anyway.
Yeah. Boris Johnson is set to announce new measures to boost home ownership. In a speech today, the Prime Minister is expected to extend the right to buy to those who currently rent from housing associations and plans for lower-paid workers to use housing benefits to buy homes. It comes days after Monday's confidence vote in his leadership, in which 4 in 10 of his own MPs voted against him. A search is continuing for 2 people who went missing after their boat capsized on a lake in Devon. Emergency services rescued 2 people safely from the water at Rodeford Lake yesterday afternoon, and another 2 were taken to hospital in Plymouth. Police confirmed all those involved were local adults, and next of kin of those missing had been informed. And a vigil set to be held outside the Brazilian embassy in London this morning for a British journalist missing in the Amazon rainforest. Dom Phillips and his Indigenous guide disappeared on Sunday, and it's understood he'd been threatened before going missing. Brazilian footballing icon and 3-time World Cup winner Pelé has joined calls for authorities to intensify their search for the pair. That's all for now. We'll have more updates in half an hour.
Good morning to you. This is Talk Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley Brewer. Thank you so much for your company. 7:32 is the time. Lots of you getting in touch, telling us about how the price of a tank of petrol for a family car hitting £100 today, how that's going to affect you. We'll get to more of your tweets in a few moments. Do get in touch. Tweet me at Talk TV or text on 87222 as well. Right now, let's talk about the announcement today from the Prime Minister in a speech later on today about a new extension of the right to buy scheme, of course launched by Margaret Thatcher back in 1980. Very controversial scheme even to this day. And we're going to be talking to the Levelling Up and Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, a little bit later in the show about that, and his opposite number in Labour, Lisa Nandy, as well. Right now, though, let's talk to Robert Colville. He's director of the Centre for Policy Studies, a very influential think tank on the right. Good morning to you, Robert.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, you have a fair amount of influence in what sort of policies we do here from Number 10. The announcement today comes on the same day you've got a new report exposing bias against ownership within the benefit system, exposing the problem about how we're basically, subsidising renters but also subsidising private landlords. Today, the Prime Minister is going to announce 2 extensions to right to buy. One is extending the right to buy from not just council tenants but to housing association tenants as well. And there are 2.4 million households that are housing association homes, but also allowing people for the first time to use housing benefit payments to help buy their homes and to make those monthly mortgage payments. Currently, they're not allowed to do that. What did you make of this announcement?
Well, I think it's really good that the government's getting onto this terrain, or getting back onto this terrain, I should say. So the announcement about housing associations was actually, as everyone has been pointing out, brought in under David Cameron. And
there was a pilot scheme, wasn't there?
Well, it was a commitment, and then it ended up as a pilot scheme. But what essentially happened was that Theresa May, among her many other failings, didn't really care about home ownership or house building, in fact. And so, in the face of pressure from the housing associations and from the blob, she caved on it. But I mean, there's a fundamental unfairness that, these homes had the right to buy attached to them when they were council houses, and they were given to housing associations, and the right to buy was stripped away when the sitting tenants left. So effectively, something was removed from these properties that's now being given back to them. Yeah. And I think that's probably quite a good idea.
There are 4 million households which are rented social housing, including those 2.4 million households in housing association homes. I'd say I don't approve of the right to buy scheme at all. My view is if you're in a position where you can buy your own home, then you should move out your council property or your housing association property and go and buy one. You've got a subsidised rent as it is. Makes it easier for you to save up and to afford somewhere else. I think you should leave those homes for people who are more in need. I'm old-fashioned like that, and especially as those homes are not going to be replaced. Michael Gove's I know he's already been asked today.
They are going to be replaced, I think.
Well, and but under Margaret Thatcher, there was a deliberate policy not to replace them. We've got one of the smallest social housing stocks in Europe, haven't we? But the idea...
No. We have one of the largest social housing stocks in Europe. This is what everyone doesn't understand.
Council homes, we don't.
Well, yeah, but housing association, council houses, there's functionally no difference. They're serving exactly the same social purpose. They're literally the same homes. They were just moved from one owner to the other in a shuffle of paper.
OK, so, right. The issue I've got with this is that I think these homes should be available to people who really need them. By definition, if you could get a mortgage, you don't really need them, do you?
Well, so, I mean, if you can get a mortgage with the massive discount that Help to Buy comes with.
Yeah.
So I think there's two issues here. You know, fundamentally, I think everyone should have the chance to own. That's like it's such a natural part of being of living a good life. And you know, if we can sell council houses to their tenants while using the proceeds to build more social housing, you know, that's a net win. You're creating more homeowners. There's also a financial aspect here, which is where the housing benefit stuff comes on. It is astronomically expensive for the country to have so many people on, you know, whose rent we're effectively paying and are going to carry on paying. You know, as long as the housing crisis goes on, you know, the cost of paying someone housing benefit throughout their life, and then especially when they're a pensioner, meaning they don't have a housing wealth to draw on to pay for their social care. That is that is one of the biggest fiscal time bombs.
£30 billion cost of housing benefits. I remember it was just 20 billion. I remember discussing that not that long ago. But this is the thing: the other plan is to allow people to use their housing benefit payments. So people who are on low enough income that they're entitled to housing benefit. Many of these people, of course, in work, but in lower paid work, getting housing benefits. So the rest of us are paying taxes to top up their income so they can afford to pay a private rent. They're going to be allowed to use those housing benefit payments to make monthly mortgage payments. They're currently banned from doing that. How on earth will this work? If you're on low enough income that you can't afford your rent, surely you're not in a position to save up a deposit or to pay a mortgage. And surely also, given that you can't get housing benefit or any other benefits if you've got more than £16,000 in benefits, I mean, that doesn't touch the size of a deposit for most homes right now, even in, you know, many cheaper parts of the country. So this is a nonsense policy, isn't it?
No, so everyone's reporting this as though we're saying, as though the government is saying.
We? Oh, that was telling.
Because we address this in our report, which is what I'm going to come to. You know, everyone's reporting this as though the government is saying, you know, that someone on universal credit is going to be putting down a deposit for £1 million townhouse in Mayfair, or, you know, a lovely two-bed in a something. But what we're talking about here is something quite different, and actually, it's about the right to buy and why take-up of that has fallen away, which is that it's become an incredibly risky proposition, because if you are someone who's been living in the same council house for 20 years and you've got the chance to exercise the right to buy, the odds are actually stacked against you, because the moment you do that, you lose access to housing benefit, you have to pay repair costs, you become incredibly vulnerable to any sort of sudden income shocks. In the long term...
Well, like the rest of us.
Everybody
who buys.
Everyone should, like, we
the boiler breaks, the roof needs mending. Everybody, that's.
We published other reports saying that saying that we should give massive tax breaks to landlords and tenants to help landlords to land and sell to tenants. I think we should be trying to help everyone in every category into ownership, because it's such an important.
No, what we should know, we want everybody to have access to a nice home. Most actually European countries don't have the level of home ownership that we have in this country. It's an obsession we have in this country.
Again, that's completely wrong. We have below average levels of home ownership. There is one country, Germany, which has a weird obsession with renting. Every other country in Europe, and in fact the world, ownership is what people want.
Oh, no, it's ownership. Look, I love the fact that when I first bought my own home, I was one of those people lucky enough to be able to do it in my very late 20s. But again, with some help, with some bit of bank and mum and dad, not everyone's got that. And I know how lucky I am that people have got that. But look, this is the thing. This is the problem I've got with this, is that the problem we've got in this country is not that, we need to help this person or that person to get a property because they cost so much. The problem is we don't build enough homes. The government's got a pledge to build 300,000 homes a year by the time of the next election in 2024. They don't even have to build any this year, as long as they built them in that year. We don't build enough homes. We've got millions more people in this country. People are living longer. People are living in divided families. We had a huge, massive increase in people coming from abroad in this country for about 10 years. We need to have more homes. If you boost supply to meet the demand, then home prices don't cost so much, rents won't cost so much. You can solve a lot of these problems a much more simpler way, rather than just helping this or that extra few thousand people to get on the housing ladder.
So I completely agree with you. We absolutely need to build more homes. And by the way, I'm one of my favourite things in politics at the moment is watching people say we should let in hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, hundreds of thousands of people from Hong Kong, but we shouldn't build any homes to cope with them. I mean, that's insane. However, even if we doubled the number of homes we were building, that wouldn't feed into house prices for decades to come. Partly because we just haven't built enough for so long. Like, one of my favourite statistics on this: if in the decade after the financial crisis we had not built a single home, but we had prevented people becoming buy-to-let, like we had prevented anyone buying any extra buy-to-let properties, we would have more home ownership now than we do. Because
but we wouldn't have any more. It's not whether they're buy-to-let. It's not whether they're... We simply don't have enough homes for people in this country.
I agree, but you don't have enough homes for people. But we also...
But what does this policy do to create any more homes?
We also have a massive problem with the existing stock, that not enough of the existing homes are in owner occupation. And so what we should be doing, which is what we're suggesting, is try to turn those into owner occupied homes and using the money to build more homes, thereby by solving both problems at once.
Yeah, I genuinely, I don't know what I'm missing here, but I just do not get... I genuinely think this is robbing Peter to pay Paul. We'll end up with no extra homes in the long run. Robert Colville, Director of the Centre for Policy Studies, thank you for that. We'll be talking to the Levelling Up and Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, about that later in the show, and his opposite number, Lisa and Andy. Do stay tuned for that. Get the thoughts of Ali Miraj, who's joining me in the studio on that in a few moments. We'll get latest sports, and we're going to talk about trans cyclists. Oh, yeah, that battle looms its head once again. This is Talk Breakfast. Morning to you. This is Talk Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley Brewer. It's 7:45, and Ali Muraj is still with his political commentator. Ali, your thoughts on that conversation about this housing ownership thing? Big announcement from the Prime Minister and part of the big reset. Am I just getting this wrong? Am I just missing this? That I think that the idea of letting people use housing benefits to pay for a mortgage is insane.
Well, if you're missing it, so am I. So I don't really understand the policy at all. I think we need to hear more.
Is this a load of rich people? Don't understand how people live their lives and have no idea that...
Fundamentally, we need to build more homes. But the interesting thing I found from Robert...
Everybody, put down your tea and coffee, finish your mouth of toast and your cornflakes. All together now. What is the solution to the housing crisis, high rents and housing problems in this country? It is, all together, build more homes.
It was interesting. Robert said, everyone thinks this policy is about people... on housing benefits, buying £1 million townhouses in Mayfair. Yeah. £1 million townhouse in Mayfair? Even more like 20 million. What townhouse in Mayfair is for
London,
$1 million?
I mean, I know most people don't live in London because you're saying £1 million in outskirts of London won't get you a 3-bedroom semi-detached house.
Exactly. No, look, I don't understand this policy. I think, look, fundamentally, I do get that culturally, and I applaud this, and I'm a big supporter of it, people should want to and be encouraged to own their own home and supported where the government can. But yet again, Julia, the government, we're in the cost of living crisis. There's all this pressure on public spending. Now they're announcing this. Where's the money coming from?
Indeed. Well, look, let me go back to the cost of living, because our question to you, my lovely viewer and listener today, is about the price of a tank of petrol for a family car hitting £100 today for the average family car. I want to know how this will affect you. Do tweet me at Talk TV, or you can text the word TALK to 87222, then your message. Halton says, already has. I put £100 in mine on Monday and the tank wasn't even full. Gina says, I live in rural Scotland and for work I travel around 600 plus miles a week. Oh my God. Like so many, fuel costs are crippling my business. Up here in a week, diesel went up 5p a litre. Green taxes and VAT need to be cut, at least for an interim period, to help out. ABC says, levelling up, clearly not though, not thought through. Energy used in sunny south, well-insulated apartments, not representative of older homes in the north, especially those exposed to elements at high altitudes. To be proportionate, doubling fuel subsidy for them wouldn't touch the sides of the cost increases. Led says working people are being priced off the roads. First the charging to go into certain areas like cities, then the cost of new cars, and now the fuel, making it impossible, getting to the point where it's not worth going to work anymore. A lot of people are saying that. Let's get the latest sports now with Nick Ellaby. Good morning to you, Nick. Cheer us up, please.
Hi, good morning. How are you doing? Well, I think these golfers signed up for the Live Series are not going to have any problems with money for in the near future.
Everyone's having such a go about this. I mean, only yesterday I learned from you that it was actually Live, not LIV, and of course, obviously. But everyone's having such a go at these golfers that, oh my God, you're doing something in Saudi Arabia. Sports people and sports tournaments are being held in horrible, tyrannical, murderous regimes all the time. We're going to be playing football in the World Cup in Qatar in a few months' time. We have the Olympics in China, where they lock people up simply for being the wrong religion and steal their organs for order. I mean, why is everyone so upset about Saudi Arabia all of a sudden, just because it's golfers?
Well, I think it's because it's what's called sports washing, which is happening a lot, but Phil Mickelson, who has signed up for the tour, has mentioned the fact that journalist Jamal Khashoggi went into a Saudi embassy in Turkey and never came out.
It's a horrible, nasty regime. We should have nothing to do with it. But we do.
Well, politicians and world leaders have used sport to their advantage, ever since, whether it's the murderous Brazilian dictatorship in the 60s and 70s, using that great football team to kind of as a symbol of national progress, or just Tony Blair playing head tennis with Kevin Keegan. Politicians always want to associate themselves with sport because it's feel-good, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, I have good news on Emma Raducanu, who's going to be fit for Wimbledon after that injury scare, we understand. But I just want to talk very briefly about the Liverpool mayor, who's going to France to give evidence over the Champions League.
Yeah, so the Liverpool City Mayor, Steve Rotherham, he's appearing at the French Senate today. He went to the Champions League final between Liverpool and Real Madrid a couple of weeks ago and had his phone and other items stolen from him before the final. There was
There was a whole spate of crime, wasn't it? It wasn't just people trying to get into the tournament. So he's giving evidence, presumably also defending a lot of Liverpool fans, because we know actually a lot of the violence and the crimes committed weren't by Liverpool fans.
Yes, originally they were blamed by French politicians, but Steve Rotherham's, he's called the scenes chaotic, and he actually says there was a breakdown of control and communication. And also Liverpool officials are meeting UEFA officials today as well, just to make sure that they have doing an independent review into what happens, and they want to make sure that it is fully independent, because there is a suggestion that the guy heading it up is actually linked to UEFA President Alexander Ceferin, so they're making sure that's all above board.
Thank you very much, Nick Ellaby. Appreciate that. 7:50 is the time. Let's turn our attention right now to trans rights, where they coincide with, hit up against women's rights, and we see this again and again, don't we? In sport, particularly, we had the championship swimmers. We've seen weightlifting in the Olympics, and of course recently with cycling, as trans cyclist Emily Bridges has said that I'm not going to say he or she, because I'll just get in trouble with Ofcom if I say the wrong thing, but I refuse to call someone who was born with a penis she. I'm sorry, I'm old-fashioned like that. But Emily Bridges has done an interview on ITV where Emily Bridges has said that Emily Bridges does not want to claim any special rights, any special treatment, because Emily Bridges wants to be able to compete against female cyclists, even though Emily Bridges is a biological male. Well, let's talk about this with Sharon Davies, who's, of course, Olympic swimming silver medalist and a women's rights campaigner on this. Good morning to you, Sharon.
Good morning. How are you, Julia?
Very well indeed. Well, one can get oneself, into a tongue twister dealing with these issues, because I can't be in a situation where I'm saying trans woman cyclist Emily Bridges says that she wants to be able to compete against women cyclists, because then, why would you query it? The key issue here is, and this is nothing against Emily Bridges, and this is nothing against anyone who wants to live their life as a different sex from the one that they actually were born to, but Emily Bridges was born a biological male, remains a biological male, but is living life as a woman and wants to compete on the women's cycling circuit and has been allowed to do so. But Emily Bridges says that Emily is not asking for any extra special treatment, but this is special treatment, isn't it?
Yeah, that's probably the thing that annoyed me the most about the interview, was that you're not asking for any special treatment, and you are absolutely asking for special treatment, because Emily Bridges has never been stopped from competing. It's very frustrating when the mainstream media use the words banned, because Emily Bridges is not banned at all. Emily Bridges can race in the men's category whenever, has always raced in the men's category, was racing in the men's category earlier this year very successfully, and so therefore can carry on racing in the men's category. As you mentioned, if you are a trans woman, the word trans is in the title, which means that you are transitioning, you have transitioned, you wish to identify with the opposite gender than the one you actually are, which means that Emily Bridges is male. Now, there's no peer-reviewed studies in the world that shows that you can mitigate or remove all male puberty advantage, which means that you're asking female athletes to compete with somebody who has an unfair advantage. Yeah. And we're not asking that of male athletes. We're only asking female athletes.
No, this isn't an issue.
Not male athletes.
It's an issue because we haven't got a whole bunch of women who now want to live as men saying, yeah, I want to compete against men. This is the thing.
They don't do that, Julia.
No, exactly. Emily Bridges is no more banned from cycling against women than Jason Kenny is banned from cycling against his wife Laura Kenny. I mean, this is reality. These are different races. But this is the crucial thing. I know you've done a lot of research into this, and you were competing in swimming at a time when we had a whole load of East European, particularly East German athletes who were competing, who were drugged up their eyeballs, and they were victims as much as anyone else. Frankly, they were forced to do it, a lot of them, where they had this incredible sort of testosterone steroid advantage. These were women, biological women, but were basically given male sort of sex hormone advantages, which basically stole a load of medals from people like you and other women competing fairly. But this is even more unfair, because even someone who has taken any drugs they want to take to reduce their testosterone, like Emily Bridges, and live as a woman, tell us the advantages they still have, no matter what, simply because they've been born men.
I mean, that's why I'm so vocal about this, because I did live through that period. It did affect me, but it affected a lot of my friends as well. I had friends that were fourth behind 3 East Germans, and no one has ever remembered their names, and their whole lives would have been different. It's a shameful period of history where the IOC did absolutely nothing to defend clean sport. So my conscience just won't let me sit back and let it happen again. And all the paperwork and the documentation proves that the East German system could put young girls through male puberty and give them a 9% advantage. And in the Olympic Games in 1980, where I won my medal, they took 90% of the women's medals and they took 5% of the men's. You know, it was incredibly obvious and nothing was ever done.
Yeah.
And I just can't sit back and let it happen again. And we have an even bigger difference between male and female. So at Olympic level, it's between 10 and 30%. The more explosive an event is, like weightlifting, 30%. The less explosive event, middle distance running, sort of 10%. Cycling is somewhere in the middle. It sort of varies a little bit.
But even just things like being with male hips, not female hips, you've got a better chance on, cycling fast. You've got the power, you've got the muscle memory, you've got the testosterone.
You also have a thing called a Q angle. So a Q angle is the difference between your hips and your knees. And a female pelvis is very different. We have a different shape because we're made to give birth. Yeah. So the angle is much deeper, and therefore we are prone to a lot more injury.
And then just an inbuilt advantage. I mean, this is just fundamentally, it is not about hating trans people or wanting anyone to be abused or anything like that.
Everybody should have access to sport. Sport is really important.
It's about fairness, though. It's about a level playing field.
I'm sorry?
It's just about fairness, a level playing field.
Yeah, it's just about fairness. It's just about equal opportunities of success in sport for people that are born female. That's it in a nutshell. Yeah. And it's not anti-trans in any shape or form. We should make sure that everybody can do sport. Again, what's frustrating, you talked just a little bit about trans men who are biologically female. We had trans men competing at the NC2As, where we saw Leah Thomas competing, and we had binary identifying females competing at the Olympic Games. They all choose to compete in the women's category. Yeah. So if they can compete in the women's category and identify as men, then trans women can identify as women and compete in the men's category.
And that's where we get to it. It's just about fairness, folks. It really, really is. There's nothing more complicated than that. I don't understand why people get it. Sharon Davis, by the huge thanks to you. She has been an absolute hero on this issue. And the abuse and the work that she's lost and things as a result of talking about it's controversial. It's not controversial to 99% of us. It really isn't. Coming up, we're going to talk to Ian Doug Smith. We're going to be talking to the Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove, and many other top guests. This is Talk Breakfast.
On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 8.
Good morning, I'm Emily Rose Adams. The average cost of filling up a family car is expected to have reached £100 for the first ever time, with official figures released later today. It comes as the British Chamber of Commerce warns Britain's economic growth will slow this year, while inflation is set to rise by 10% by the final quarter of 2022. Talk Radio's political editor Peter Cardwell says government support hasn't gone far enough.
The government will argue there are loads of global factors involved in this. They're trying to name and shame forecourts that are not passing on the 5p reduction. But when it happens in the last sort of 24, 48 hours, it's gone up by 2p anyway.
Yeah. Boris Johnson set to announce new measures to boost home ownership in a speech today. The Prime Minister is expected to extend the right to buy to those who currently rent from housing associations, and plans for lower paid workers to use housing benefits to buy homes. It comes days after Monday's confidence vote in his leadership, in which 4 in 10 of his own MPs voted against him. A search is continuing for 2 people who went missing after their boat capsized on a lake in Devon. Emergency services rescued 2 people safely from the water at Rodeford Lake yesterday afternoon, and another 2 were taken to hospital in Plymouth. Police confirmed all those involved were local adults, and next of kin of those missing had been informed. Energy watchdog Ofgem has found thousands of customers who lost power during Storm Arwen were provided with an unacceptable service. Nearly 1 million homes were cut off after winds of up to 98 miles per hour battered parts of the UK last November, and around 4,000 were still affected for over a week after. The US House of Representatives have voted for a series of gun control measures after officials heard testimony from an 11-year-old survivor of last month's school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, that killed 19 children and 2 teachers. The bill passed includes raising the minimum age for buying semi-automatic guns from 18 to 21, although it's highly unlikely to pass through the US Senate and become law. Well, an overseas spokesman for the Republican Party, Greg Swenson's told Talk TV that existing laws should be enforced before new ones are passed.
There are plenty of gun laws on the books which are not being enforced. If laws were enforced and people didn't fear for their lives going out in the street, perhaps they wouldn't be buying guns, but it's their right to defend themselves.
And a vigil set to be held outside the Brazilian embassy in London this morning for a British journalist missing in the Amazon rainforest. Dom Phillips and his guide disappeared on Sunday, and it's understood he'd been threatened before going missing. While Brazilian footballing icon and 3-time World Cup winner Pelé has today joined calls for authorities to intensify their search for the pair. And now it's time for today's weather.
Business sponsors Talk TV weather.
Hello, I'm Nazanin Gaffer. Wet and windy weather from the west over the next few days. We are seeing the remnants of Tropical Storm Alex heading towards northern parts of the UK through Friday and Saturday. It's going to bring very windy conditions there. And interestingly, over the next few days, we are also going to see high or very high pollen levels due to the fact that it's going to turn increasingly windy, but also temperatures are going to be rising, especially across southern areas. And we've seen quite a lot of rain recently. As a result, that means there's a lot of grass about, and lots of grass pollen levels are going to be high too, mainly across England and Wales. So for today, we are starting off mostly fine and dry, but out towards the southwest, it's already cloudy with some patchy outbreaks of rain. Cloudy across parts of the north as well, brighter further south. That band of rain will be moving its way eastwards through today, mainly reaching central and western parts of the UK, where it will be mostly cloudy with some patchy outbreaks of rain. But across eastern Scotland and eastern parts of England, it looks mostly fine and bright. Then for Friday and for Saturday, as I mentioned, we are going to see the remnants of Tropical Storm Alex approaching northern parts of the UK. It's going to bring very windy conditions across these areas, choppy waters, gales likely around parts of the coast, but calmer across parts of the south, mainly dry and bright.
Sunday Times Culture sponsors Talk TV weather.
Hey, Kevin, what did you think of the show last week? I thought it was extraordinary, Mike. A landmark moment in television history. One small thing, though, you've got to raise your game. You've got to stop shouting. I'll stop shouting if you raise your game. Saturday night, 7 p.m, Talk TV.
Good Good morning to you. It's Thursday the 9th of June. You're watching Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley Brewer, on Talk TV. We are live from the Talk Radio studios. Coming up, the average family car now costs £100 to fill up with petrol after the biggest daily price jump in 17 years yesterday. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson will announce today that lower-paid workers will be allowed to use their housing benefits to buy their own homes in an extension to the Right to Buy scheme. And the first flight to Rwanda to deport Channel migrants due next Tuesday could face long delays after lawyers launched, what a surprise, legal challenges. The time right now is 8:05. This is Talk Breakfast. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Whether you are watching on Talk TV, whether you are an old-time listener on Talk Radio, it's great to have you on board. I really appreciate your company and the company of my guest this morning, political commentator Ali Miraj. Ali, we have got so much to get our teeth into this morning. I mean, genuinely, each one of the three biggest stories I just talked about there, you could do the whole 3.5 hours of the show on. We're asking people to text in and tweet in about the price of a tank of petrol for a family car hitting £100 today, asking how will this affect you. Get in touch, tweet me at Talk TV, or you can text to 87222. Lots more messages coming in. I had a message earlier from someone who's disabled saying, I'm going to have to give up my car. I can't afford to get anywhere. I'm going to be housebound. People are saying that it's not worth going to work. It's basically putting them out of business because they need to drive their cars for their work. One person saying, £600 miles a week. We can talk about all these housing policies or Rwanda, and these can be red meat policies for red wall voters or whoever. Fundamentally, every single person in this country, but particularly the poorest and people on middle incomes, are being really hard hit by this cost of living crisis.
It's really tough, and that is the biggest issue facing the government, and that will be whether they win or lose the next general election. Look, it's easy for someone like me who lives in a city like London. I can get around on the tube, and I use my car sparingly, but not everyone has that luxury.
80% of people in this country get to work in their cars.
It is really tough, but, you know, the problem is that there is no silver bullet for this. I know that you've got Ian Duncan-Smith coming on soon. I'm sure he's going to be talking about tax cuts and really the government going down that road. The reality is we've got massive borrowing that was spent on the back of furlough and COVID and all this other stuff that we've done. And we've got to get real as a nation. This is going to be painful, and that's why the poorest should be helped. But it is not going to be easy for us in the coming years.
It's not going to be easy for anyone, is it? 8:07. Let's get to Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, who's just mentioned. He's Tory MP. He's also a former welfare reform minister, so, you know, work and pensions minister. He's also former Conservative leader. Good morning to you, Sir Ian.
Good morning.
So many things I want to talk to you about. You've been leader of the party. You know what it would be like to sort of, you know, be effectively be told by your backbenchers, actually, thanks but no thanks anymore. 41% of Tory MPs did that on Monday night. Boris Johnson made it very clear. Prime Minister's questions yesterday, after the Cabinet yesterday as well. He wants to get on with the job, deal with the policies that matter to people. That'll be cost of living. We're being promised tax cuts, we're told, dealing with the housing issue and dealing with issues like the Channel migrants. Do you think he has got a grip on it? Do you think the policies he's announcing and the stories we're talking about today, do you think those are enough to keep Boris Johnson in his job and perhaps win him another election victory come 2024?
Well, just like anybody else, I can't predict the future. So, but what I can tell you is that there is no mood, as I believe it, in the Conservative Party at the moment to continue this process. Having had their vote, Boris Johnson won the vote, and I think the vast majority of the MPs now know it would be incredibly damaging just to carry on an internecine warfare. What we have to do is make sure that we get the priorities in focus and deal with them. The number one priority right now is quite rightly the way that the cost of living is spiking. We remember and should remember that the spike isn't just here in the UK. There's a tendency to say the UK has got a problem. Actually, every country in the developed and undeveloped world is now facing this problem for two reasons. One is the pandemic lockdown has meant that a huge amount of stuff that should normally be produced was not produced. So demand outstrips supply. That always leads to an inflation spike, dramatically outstrips supply. You've seen it in microchips for cars and everything else. It's to fuel as well. And then also you've got the war in Ukraine, and so access to energy has been much tighter. It's taught us two lessons, I think, here. Number one, the security of your energy supply is an absolute priority, and I'm afraid we and other countries over the last number of governments decided that it didn't matter and we could just buy energy from anywhere, and we stopped producing our own energy. We're sitting on North Sea oil and gas, and we also have shale gas reserves here in the UK. So it's time for us to start thinking seriously about even going for net zero. You're going to need gas well into past that. We've got to start producing our own. We could actually be exporting it if we got it right to Europe to get them off their addiction to Russian gas. So all of that's vitally important. That's a lesson for the future. The second aspect is, of course, with inflation spiking, it's a priority. To be fair to the government, they've done 2 tranches of spending on this, which together, most of the fiscal commentators have said, pretty much helps the lowest paid in society and many further up the income to actually deal with the cost of living to a greater or lesser extent. Yes, there are problems about unfair spiking of prices at petrol stations. That needs to be dealt with. But the real point going forward is, look, 2 things are very important. Number one, inflation, it's almost certain, will now start to plateau and then fall in the late year, new year, as it goes, for 2 good reasons. First of all, it's, as I say, international, and a lot of those elements will start to smooth out.
Yep.
Secondly, the bank, who were very slow and should have raised interest rates a year before and stopped printing money, did so. That fueled inflation. They've stopped that now, and they are actually raising interest rates. So monetary policy is tightening, and that is already having an effect and will have an effect as we go forward. What we don't need, and this is the real key, it's not about, we want tax cuts. That what we do not need right now is to have a very high tax base on the public. That's a double whammy. That runs the risk of a stagflation problem. If we have no growth, negative growth, recession, and high interest rates, we will squeeze the public too hard.
This is what the OECD is basically saying yesterday. Their report suggesting that they predict that the UK will have the worst growth in the G20, the 20 richest countries in the world, except for Russia, which is undergoing huge economic sanctions. We're only going to be above them next year in terms of growth. And they're saying that actually we should be looking at tax cuts and more spending.
Yes, and here's the key. This is not a sort of we want tax cuts, therefore we don't care about borrowing. Actually, the government has had far stronger figures on their borrowing than they expected. The last 2 years, they had 91 billion and 90 billion more coming in revenues than forecast. So they are ahead of their own target by some significant degree. They also, I didn't think they needed the windfall tax, by the way, but they also already had a windfall tax because as the inflation spiked, so their revenues went up because, of course, that meant they were gathering more in tax paid. So they've had a big spike in windfall money coming into the government.
So you're saying they can afford to give some of that money back to us?
It's not just afforded, it's vital that it does need to happen, and it does need to happen fairly soon.
Look, undoubtedly you are from the wing of the party, would definitely like to see those tax cuts. I mean, whether or not we see them...
I suspect, Julia, there isn't a wing of the party here because every Conservative MP accepts that we have to lower the burden, particularly on what I call the squeeze middle, those people below, high...
These are the policies we want to hear. OK, and I think everyone listening and watching right now would like to hear that as well. But the policies we are hearing about today, the other 2 policies we're hearing about, one is housing and the other is the Rwanda Channel migrant policy. I'll ask you about housing. Among this extension to the right to buy policy, of course, originally from Margaret Thatcher in 1980, we are going to see an extension to housing association tenants being able to buy as well as council tenants, but crucially also people being allowed to use their housing benefit payments, which are topping up their low wages to pay for their private rents right now, to use those for paying their mortgage and towards deposits for mortgages and the like. You're a former Work and Pensions Secretary. Does anybody who is needing to have the rest of the country, taxpayers, topping up their wages to help pay their rent in a private rental situation, does any of those people, are they in a position to buy a home, or is this an absolutely nonsense policy?
Well, look, I don't know the details of this for obvious reasons. It hasn't been explained. I'll know that later today. What I can say is that the right to buy was an integrally important part of a Conservative offer to the public, not for even political reasons, but because it's important for people to have a chance and opportunity to own their own homes. It shouldn't be just for a privileged few, and home ownership has fallen in the UK. So the big problem that has existed is it was always on council housing, but as we've seen over the last 2 decades, the amount of housing held in council house hands is very small now.
It's 1.6 million. There are 2.4 million households that are a housing association. But can I get to the housing benefits?
Well,
time is very short, Sirine. You spoke for a long time at the beginning.
Explain this to you. Getting it across to housing associations gives people who do not in housing associations have the right to buy their own properties, gives them a right to buy, which opens the door to a lot more properties. That will reduce housing benefit in due course, because as you buy your own home, you will no longer be eligible for housing benefit. So that will start to cut the housing benefit bill as well. You will be responsible for the upkeep of your home.
Yeah, but that's okay. But if people are allowed to use their housing benefit, if you are needing to have your wages subsidised by the rest of us, are you in a position to buy your own home, or is this just a sort of a nice headline to get, and it actually won't make any difference? Because it seems to me, if we want to make it easier for people to buy their own homes, the solution is to build more homes so we increase supply to match the demand.
Yeah, you have to build more homes. The government's got a plan to build more homes, and that's already in the bill.
How long have they been in office? Just checking.
Yeah, they're building more homes at the moment, so they're
not many.
Well, it's a lot going up, actually, believe it or not. But the trouble is, during the pandemic, a lot didn't go up. Yeah. Come on, get back to that. The one thing that the lockdown, which I voted against at times, did is it actually screwed the economy, and it screwed all the plans that we made. So we're having to catch up. Okay.
Let me also ask you about Rwanda, because we've only got a minute or so left. The front page of one of the papers today, lawyers set to ground first Rwanda flight. First flight taking Channel migrants who are applying for asylum here, but have arrived on those rickety boats across the Channel. It's supposed to leave to Rwanda on Tuesday for them to be assessed and then possibly resettled there. The usual human rights lawyers, judicial reviews, legal challenges. We expected all that. Does the government ever expect those flights to go, or do they just want to see these sort of headlines at the front of the Daily Mail telling everybody, oh, look, we're trying, and those nasty lefty lawyers are stopping us?
Well, they have to make it work because the proof of the pudding for people will be in the eating, and that is the key, that we do actually transfer what should be essentially mostly young males who have come across the Channel illegally, often in boats. The problem we've got, until it starts to become clear to those who make and take all these risks, and we've seen so many die crossing the Channel, until we get it clear to them that this is not going to be an easy option, and in actual fact the chances are you'll end up somewhere else, many, many thousands of miles away, which will not be any good to you at all. Now, this point is important. Once you start to establish it in people's minds, the risk and the reward actually gets rebalanced, and the reward is...
You think if this is allowed to actually happen, if a single flight actually ends up taking off, do you think that will actually work? It will deter those Channel migrants?
Well, I think it'll have to be more than a single flight. If you have a policy like this, and lots of people like it, lots of people don't like it, but it doesn't matter. The key thing is, if you decide this policy is going to act as a disincentive, then it has to work, and you have to have more than right.
But we can't even deport foreign criminals, someone who's raped or murdered in this country, who's then let out of jail and is supposed to be on a flight home the next day to their country. We have legal challenges to stop those flights. How on earth are we going to actually get people on board who haven't even committed any of those heinous crimes?
Well, the new bills will actually help that a lot. There's been a Home Office bill already gone through. It actually helps get this process speeded up. It's always going to be, in a democratic society, a difficulty, but... it is possible to get people onto those flights should they turn out to be unwarranted. They're not victims of slavery. I want the victims of slavery to be terribly well looked after and supported. But if somebody's come over, I don't blame them just for economic reasons without going through the processes. Then the answer is you have to deter them. That's the key.
So, Duncan Smith, we'll have to leave it there, sir. I really appreciate you joining me. Tory MP, of course, former Conservative leader and former Work and Pension Secretary as well. 8:18 is the time. Up next, I'm going to talk about those rail strikes. Talk starting today to try and avert them. Will it work, though? This is Talk Breakfast. Good morning to you. This is Talk Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley Brewer. 8:21 is the time. Ali Miraj is a political commentator joining me all this morning. Very long conversation with Ian Duncan Smith. Got through quite a lot, but it never feels like long enough to go through meaty subjects like housing and Rwanda. To come back to that Rwanda policy, I say basically, human rights lawyers are going to be stopping it. We live in a country with the rule of law. If there is a policy that's brought in, which many believe is actually an illegal policy and against our own human rights legislation, requiring us to offer asylum to people who claim asylum, and even if they come on rickety dinghies across the channel, having paid people traffickers, people have a right to challenge that, don't they? Should the government be playing this for the headlines, which, I'm sorry, undoubtedly they are?
Well, they have a right to challenge it, but also people who oppose the policy have a duty to come and tell us what the alternative is, because the current policy is not working. I mean, are they saying that people should be crossing the channel and potentially putting their lives at risk and dying in dinghies? I mean, what's the alternative? I know that it offends the sensibilities of a lot of people in this country, that Australia got tough on these measures and actually reduced this problem significantly. And you've also had this has been going for years now, Julia, where conversations have been going on with the French. We're giving them £50 million. Nothing's really happened. Various ideas have been tried. Should we send them to Ascension Island? Should we get these vehicles that sort of blow the waves back in the sea? All these kind of things.
Yeah.
So, look, the fundamental thing is you've got a problem here with people being displaced. You should not have an immigration system being the asylum system being abused by economic migrants.
Well,
They're genuine asylum
the argument
seekers.
I hear from immigration experts, lawyers and things like and refugee groups, they say actually the majority of these people who come across, nearly all young men, they are coming from countries, war-torn countries. They say they'll be persecuted, and the majority of them do get granted asylum.
Well, I mean, look, if they
they say they are legitimate. The idea that a whole bunch of 18 to 20-year-old healthy young men are much more are the most deserving people from those countries is crazy. But an awful lot of those people say the people who would argue they should be allowed to stay here is that then we don't provide legitimate routes for those people. But those are also the same people who think we shouldn't have border controls at all. They think we're all just global citizens.
Well, we should be providing more money to people to be staying close to the areas where they've been displaced to get home as quickly as they can. We need to be doing that. Yes, we need to take our fair share of people who are generally fleeing persecution, but they need to come in through proper routes. And if you're going to a first safe country on your way, you should stay in that safe country. We hear about all this stuff about people want to come here because of family reunion or they can speak English. If you're genuinely fleeing for your life, you go to the first country.
Indeed. OK, thank you very much indeed. Right, well, let's talk about people genuinely fleeing from the prospect of rail strikes. The RMT union say that up to 50,000 railway workers across Network Rail and different train operators could be going on strike 21st, 23rd and 25th of June. It's 5 days of strikes. It'll probably end up disrupting railways for a whole week. Unite union members in London also voted to strike on the 21st of June, same day as that first walkout. What an extraordinary coincidence that is. Well, the unions were branded selfish by Number 10. Today, though, there are talks to try and avert those strikes. Let's talk to Norman Baker. He's a former Lib Dem MP and Transport Minister. He's also now spokesman for the Campaign for Better Transport. Good morning to you, Norman.
Morning, Julia.
Lovely to talk to you with one of your many, many hats on. We've talked to you an awful lot about royal stories in recent months, haven't we? Rail strikes on the cards, summer of discontent. There is no doubt at all that people who have had a pay freeze for quite a few years, real terms pay cuts, facing 8% inflation, are going to want to better their pay. The trouble is, if most of us threatened to go on strike, we wouldn't be disrupting millions and millions of other people by doing it, would we? Should they be allowed to strike?
Well, I think you should be allowed to strike. It's a fundamental right to be able to withdraw your labour, but I think it's very unwise, and it's also, to use Number 10's words, rather selfish to do so. But, what the RMT and others, appear not to understand is we're in a different world. We're in a different world where the number of people travelling by train and therefore the income from the train passenger is substantially diminished as a consequence of COVID and doesn't show a sign of coming back. And secondly, the traffic that is coming back at different times. Yep. The weekend trains, the leisure travel, is coming back big time, and the commuter travel isn't. And yet the union arrangements appear to be based on sort of 1950s arrangements where people used to work 9 till 5, Monday to Friday with bowler hats and umbrellas and didn't really travel at the weekend. Yeah. So, the future of the railway is important. We need the railway to be there. We need it to be carrying people. We need to be in good shape, and that's good for all those who work on the railway as well. I think the RMT members deserve a pay rise. They have had a freeze for 2 years, and I think they also deserve to not have compulsory redundancies. But hey, I've not heard anyone in the rail industry saying that there will be a pay freeze this year. I've not heard anyone saying there's going to be compulsory redundancies. So this appears to be a strike ahead of any...
Yeah, well, we're told, you know, they haven't really sat down and talked properly. And again, that's just unacceptable in my book when it's going to affect so many people.
Yeah.
Any private company can have a dispute for their workers. As long as everyone's acting within the law, they can do as many, you know, stupid things as they want. But not when it affects millions of the rest of us. And that is the big issue, isn't it? And a lot of people would say that if you're working in an essential service like the railways, that actually we should have an independent pay body that sets these awards. Because we've seen with, you know, public sector workers, they aren't public sector workers, of course, technically, but public sector workers, they are effectively seeing a massive real terms pay cut because their pay is only going up. Is it 3% this year? Well below the price of the real inflation rate that we're seeing. These workers, some of them on average incomes, some highly paid drivers on about 60k. Again, still just as much of a right to try and improve their pay. The trouble is they do it at the cost of the rest of us, don't they? It's holding holding the country to ransom.
Well, just to be clear, the drivers, of course, are on the Network Rail are ASLEF members, not RMT members.
Well, RMT, they said they have drivers as well.
They've got drivers on the underground, I think, but not on National Rail. But look, I mean, the fact of the matter is they do provide an essential service, but that's not a reason to force them to go to work. And anyway, it wouldn't work, Julia. I mean, you can't force somebody to go to work and then operate the signals or be a conductor on a train effectively. You know, what you're going to do, get them there at gunpoint. You know, what we don't want is a repeat of Thatcher versus Scargill, which is where I fear this is going, with you know, tensions raised on both sides.
But this is it. You've got to know that these union leaders, they are hard left. An awful lot of them. It's like the National Education Union. A lot of the things they do aren't about their members so much. They want to have a summer of discontent. They want to stir up trouble. They want this Tory scum government out. Yeah. A lot of this is politically motivated rather than about, you know, getting fairness for their workers.
Well, that may be true, and there are certainly hard left elements in the RMT. That's certainly true, but that's no reason for the government or anyone else to play to that game. I think what needs to be happening now are offers of talks, and I believe they've been made. Yep. People just sit down and look rationally at the future of the railway and see how best you can maximise the number of passengers, minimise the damage to people on the street who want to use trains, which is the same thing, and also make sure that in the context of the new shape of the railways, then the workers' rights are protected as far as possible.
Trouble is, again, as you say, more people working from home. Trains are largely used by people on higher incomes. Those are the people who are largely doing the working from home thing now. Lots of those big fares that are being paid there, you know, people working in London on those commuter routes. People aren't doing that anymore. You're just simply not going to be seeing, any more funds coming back in. We had that £16 billion bailout by the government when we had lockdowns. I don't see a good future, but it's in all of our interest, even if we never get the trains, for the other people to be on them, so we can get about in cars, isn't it? Coming up, we are going to be talking to Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary. Lots coming up. This is a Talk Breakfast.
I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and I'm a Talk TV presenter. The last tweet that I really liked was a guy on a petrol forecourt who tweeted, "I just seen a guy on pump 3 fill up with £10 worth of petrol. Where's he driving to? Pump 4? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, never miss a moment with Talk TV."
This is Talk TV News.
Good morning, I'm Emily Rose Adams. The government says it keeps all measures under review to deal with the cost of living crisis. It says the average cost of filling up a family car is expected to have reached £100 for the first ever time, with official figures released later today. Boris Johnson set to announce today that lower paid workers can use their housing benefits to obtain mortgages and buy homes. It's part of new measures to boost home ownership, with the Prime Minister also expected to extend the right to buy to those who currently rent from housing associations. Energy watchdog Ofgem has found thousands of customers who lost power during Storm Arwen were provided with an unacceptable service. Nearly 1 million homes were cut off after winds of up to 98 miles per hour battered parts of the UK last November, and around 4,000 were still affected for over a week after Arwen. The US House of Representatives has voted to raise the minimum age for buying semi-automatic guns from 18 to 21 after officials heard testimony from an 11-year-old survivor of last month's school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, which killed 19 children and 2 teachers. But the bill's highly unlikely to pass through the US Senate and become law. Well, an overseas spokesman for the Republican Party, Greg Swenson's told Talk TV that existing laws should be enforced before new ones are passed.
And there are plenty of gun laws on the books which are not being enforced. If laws were enforced and people didn't fear for their lives going out in the street, perhaps they wouldn't be buying guns, but it's their right to defend themselves.
And the age at which people can buy cigarettes and tobacco should be raised every year, a review will recommend. The government hopes to eradicate smoking by 2030, and experts argue raising the legal age is crucial to achieving that. But The Times reports that ministers will reject the proposals. That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
Good morning to you. This is Talk Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley Brewer. Very much appreciate you joining me. 8:32 is the time. Let's get to some of your tweets and your text messages coming in about the cost of living crisis. The price of a tank of petrol for a normal family car hitting £100 today, already more for a diesel car, and asking how this will affect you. You can tweet me at Talk TV. You can text in on 87222. Put the word talk at the beginning of your message. Vince says, I'm a courier. My daily diesel fuel has gone up from £65 to £115 per day, £250 per week, £1,000 per month. Boris has got to get a grip of these prices, otherwise it will cost a fortune to get goods delivered. Again, that'll just end up being passed on to us. Jake says, my van now already costs £150 to fill the tank. Buzz says, it means my customers will have to pay higher prices for goods delivered, and it changes how far I will travel for business. This is destroying an already fragile economy. They need to cut fuel tax by at least 50p and charge it to profiteering oil companies. And Brian says, it will affect us all as everything we buy is delivered in vehicles using diesel. This is a major catastrophe happening before our eyes, and the government is doing nothing. Ray says, I think he might be being a bit glib here. It'll mean I'll have less money to leave to the kids. Landon predicts you can expect fuel thieving to increase. FR Powell says we need to protest to remove this government. Folk need one that can work for everyone within the budget. A lot of really angry messages about that. Ali Miraj is a political commentator joining me this morning. I mean, a lot of people are really unhappy about this. If you're running a business and your fuel prices are basically doubled, that can make your business unviable.
That's right, and I think the government is going to have to look at what it can do, but the reality is it's already done. It's already announced $21 billion the other week to try and help people with the cost of living. We had Ian Duncan-Smith on earlier talking about the inflationary pressures in the economy and how the Bank of England should increase interest rates to get on top of it. Well, if you do tax cuts, that's going to be inflationary as well. Yeah. So we are in a really, really difficult situation. And look, I totally understand where people are coming from on all this. We're all finding it really, really hard, and particularly people whose businesses depend on moving stuff around.
And people who are just scraping by, who no longer can just scrape by. We're going to talk about all of that and plenty more besides. Rwanda, new housing plans with Levelling Up and Housing Secretary Michael Gove. He's coming up in about 10-15 minutes time. First up, though, let's return to events yesterday in the German capital, Berlin, where we saw a car plough into a crowd of people on a busy shopping street. A teacher was killed and 14 school children with the teacher were injured as they were. Another second teacher was seriously hurt as well. Obviously, citizens' arrest and police getting involved. An arrest has now been made, but this happened yesterday morning. Let's talk to Aaron Tilton, who's a reporter for DW News in Berlin. Good morning to you, Aaron.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. The reports initially of this car crash, very, very, very worrying. Some 30 people we thought injured, fears that more people might have died. The circumstances of this car, I'm saying car crash, we don't yet know the motive of the person who did it or whether there was any motive at all. What does it look like from the facts that have come out so far?
Well, so far, the police have been saying that they've been investigating in every possible direction. Of course, in the initial hours after the attack, people started pointing to maybe a possible Islamist motive behind the attack. Of course, that is a suspicion that always crops up in these type of attacks, especially in Berlin, given the history of such automotive attacks here in the past. Of course, you have to think of 2016, when the Christmas market that was actually located just around the corner from yesterday's attack was attacked by a man driving a semi, and in that attack, some 13 people were killed and 70 additional injured. When it comes to yesterday's attack, however, police and local politicians seem to be indicating that this was most likely some type of mental incident on the part of the attacker.
Well, we often hear this again and again when there are attacks anywhere in mainland Europe, and actually we hear it in the UK as well. We're often told it's someone with mental health problems. This man, we believe the man who's been arrested, I think is German citizen, but shares, is it German Armenian citizenship, and he had some sort of placards about Turkey. There's possibly some sort of political motive, but perhaps not a typical. Maybe lots of people instantly thought this was an Islamist extremist attack, but we just don't know yet. But a lot of people are very cynical about these attacks being written off constantly as someone with a mental health problem.
Sure, of course. I mean, you do hear that quite often, but at least in this case, it does appear that while there was an indication or some information from the police initially that some of these political posters and flyers were found initially, that isn't really what they're focusing on right now, partially because the vehicle itself was not owned by this Armenian German man who drove it. Instead, it was actually owned by his sister. He actually lived not too far away from this location initially, so it seems like he took the vehicle and then drove it into this crowd. Yeah. At the same time, I've spoken to some other reporters and some other eyewitnesses who have been on the scene, and they did say that while the man was being subdued, he indicated, or he seemed to indicate somehow by his behavior, that he was in some type of mental distress or maybe a fugue state, some type of paranoid break. And that really does appear to be what the police are focusing right now. Now, the man had been a known figure in the police in the past, not in connection to extremism, but rather in connection to more small petty crimes like theft.
Yeah. I mean, we often see that, don't we? And of course, this whole thing was witnessed by John Barrowman, a very famous actor and singer and performer here in the UK. And eyewitness account, we saw the car plough into these people, including these children. Absolutely harrowing for them, and indeed the people seeing that, and then careering 200 metres down the road as well. And again, that obviously raising echoes of those previous terror attacks. So we'll wait and see on that. Aaron Tilton, really appreciate you joining us from Berlin. He's a reporter for DW News. Ali Maraj still with me in the studio. I mean, this is the thing, we always just get concerned about these stories, don't we? Because you instantly see these things, and you go back to that Christmas market attack in Germany, and we see these attacks again and again and again across Europe and here in the UK.
We do, and we need to obviously hold our fire until we know the details of this, but we've had a number of terrorist incidents here in the UK ourselves. I mean, remember the London Bridge attack? Yeah.
But it's amazing how often we go, oh, it's a mental health problem.
Well, look, sometimes it may genuinely be a mental health problem, but we can't use that as an excuse. We need to know what happened in this case. But I can just say, you mentioned Islamist extremism more generally, not in this particularly, we don't know yet. That is a serious issue, and we should call it out for what it is. And we should also, people in this country who say that we need to sort of adjust the prevent strategy, need to come up with something else.
Absolutely. 8:39 is the time. Coming up, we will be talking to Michael Gove, the Levelling Up and Housing Secretary. We're going to talk to him about all the big stories today, including cost of living, housing, and there is Rwanda migrants. Will that plane ever leave next Tuesday? I think we all know it won't. First up, though, let's talk about one of the other big aspects of the cost of living, of course, which is the Ukraine war. It's not just affecting the price of oil and gas and pushing up fuel at the pumps and what it costs to heat our homes. It's also having a massive impact on global food supplies. Yesterday, we had the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, promising to offer some sort of help to stop that effectively impossibility of getting grain supplies out of the port of Odessa, constantly under bombardment from the Russian forces. Let's talk to Mike Yardley. He's a military historian and joins us now. Good morning to you, Mike.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much for joining us. So there's no doubt at all that Russia will stop at nothing when it comes to the weapons of war they will use against the Ukrainian people, and indeed those who are helping to arm the Ukrainians, the West, and pay back for those sanctions. And they know that the impact in terms of fuel prices puts more money in their coffers every time the price goes up, and it helps fund their war effort, but also damaging our economy. But also, no doubt, Vladimir Putin rubbing his hands with glee at the lack of grain, wheat, sunflower oil, all the fertilizer, all these supplies coming out of Ukraine that aren't coming out. Massive impact on every country, but particularly the poorest countries in the world.
Well, yes, you've got countries like Egypt, the Sudan, they're going to be Afghanistan even, they're all going to be terribly impacted by this. And this war is happening at different levels, of course. At this strategic economic level, we're looking at the States, which has very reduced grain production this year. We have the Ukraine, which is producing something like a quarter of the world's grain, and that's not getting out. It's rotting in silos. The Russians are sending a little bit of it out through some of the ports that they control. I wouldn't say it's a happy situation for the Russians. And trying to get an accurate picture of what's really happening in Ukraine is very difficult. I mean, this is a very strange country. I mean, it was in a mess before the war. It was one of the most corrupt countries itself. I think even higher on the international indexes of corruption than Russia itself was.
Which is saying something. Yeah, I mean, actually, no one's pretending this was an idyll, are they, at all? In terms of just where we are in the Russian offensive in the Donbass, there does seem to be, once again, a war of attrition. The Ukrainians able to hold off. Do you think that we can actually get to a point where there will be some sensible talks to end this and some sort of conciliation?
I think there must be eventually, but let's go back to your last point, because I don't think we've all had particularly informative reporting coming out of Ukraine. I think the coverage has been limited and lacking in many respects. We haven't really had as much frontline footage as we would have liked. We've had an awful lot of human interest stories. We see pictures of rusted vehicles. We don't see so many pictures of smoking vehicles. So let's just assess it very quickly.
Okay, I'm afraid we've only got 1 minute left, so it'll have to be very quick indeed, Mike.
A disaster for Putin in many ways, because they've lost over 1,000 tanks, something like 5,000 vehicles in total. Who knows how many troops, 20,000, 30,000, something of that order. The Ukrainians have taken similar casualties. We have poured petrol on the flames to a degree with our supply of missiles and other equipment.
I mean, pouring petrol on the flames, I mean, giving people the tools to fight back. But I'm sorry we can't talk for longer. We obviously had some technical difficulties getting you up on the phone line. Apologies, that took some of our time. Mike Yardy, I hope you come back again soon and talk to us. He's a military historian. Up next, we're going to get a break. Then we're going to be talking to the Levelling Up and Housing Secretary, Michael Gove. You do not want to miss that. This is Talk Breakfast. Good morning to you. This is Talk Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley Brewer. Thank you very much indeed for your company. 8:46 is the time. Delighted to welcome the Levelling Up Housing and Communities Secretary, Michael Gove, to the show. Good morning to you.
Hi, Julia. Good morning.
Lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. A lot to talk about. Let's get straight down to it. Cost of living crisis. A lot of the front pages today pointing out that filling up a family car right now, the tank of petrol will hit £100 today. It's already over that for people filling up with diesel. What's the government going to do about it?
Rishi cut fuel duty earlier this year, 5p cut. And the government's also looking vigilantly at what's happening on the forecourts. If we think that there's any anti-competitive practice going on, there is a watchdog, the Competition and Markets Authority, that can step in. It's a very tough situation. And, of course, it's linked, as we all know, to war in Ukraine.
I mean, a 5p cut, I mean, no one even noticed it that week when it happened. We're looking at the petrol prices going up by 2 pence yesterday alone. 5p didn't touch the sides of it. It doesn't touch the sides of the cost of living crisis that ordinary people listening and watching this are facing.
Yeah, and I don't for a moment deny the fact that with fuel prices increasing, with food prices increasing as well, it is tough out there. This is the consequence of inflationary pressures. The war in Ukraine is a principal factor. It's also the case that some of the strains caused as a result of the COVID pandemic are a factor. It's also the case that quantitative easing, which was required in the past, is a factor. When you're dealing with inflation like this, then it is painful. We have got to get the inflation out of the system, and one of the ways in which we do that is making sure that we take a balanced approach towards public spending. So we cannot spend limitless sums at this stage, because that would only end up making the situation
Michael Gove, we spent limitless sums, 400 billion quid over the last couple of years. There's no doubt at all a lot of the cost of living crisis is down to the Ukraine war. We understand that. But you mentioned it's as a result of the COVID pandemic. I'm not going to harp on about this, but it's not. It's as a result of lockdown policy, a lockdown policy you very vigorously endorsed and pushed for. That's why we're in the mess we're in. OECD report yesterday saying that of the G20 countries, the 20 richest countries in the world, our economy is going to be the most sluggish, have the lowest growth of all of those, apart from Russia, which is facing a huge economic sanctions at the moment. Why is our economy set to do so much worse than any other country?
Well, we were the second fastest growing economy in the G7 over the last year. This is a prediction, a forecast, not a certainty. It's a forecast that was made, I think, before Rishi announced his package just the other week, so it doesn't take into account those factors. And it's also the case, I think, that this forecast also says that after one tough year, we'll bounce back, inflation will be reduced, and
everything will be fine. The question is how we get through the next year. Now, also, how does the Prime Minister, how does the government get through the next year? Of course, we had that vote of confidence in the Prime Minister on Monday night. You, I imagine, although it's a secret ballot, Michael Gove, so we've no idea, voted for him. 41% of his MPs voted against keeping him in office. We're told there's going to be a load of red meat policies thrown to the backbenchers and, of course, to Tory voters as well. One of those is what the Prime Minister is going to announce today in your patch of responsibility, housing. And this is an extension of the right to buy policy. Two key things here: extending the right to buy from council tenants to housing association tenants, something that David Cameron said he'd do, but also allowing people to use their housing benefit payments to help buy their homes and make monthly mortgage payments. Roughly how many people do you think there are in this country who earn so little that they need to have their rent topped up by taxpayers with housing benefit are in a position to buy their own home?
I think that could be a significant number. I mean,
how many?
I think the key things. I think it would be impossible to calculate with precision, because we're talking about at least three moving figures there, but it is undoubtedly the case at the moment that there are people who are on housing benefit who are paying in rent more than they would pay to service a mortgage.
But you can't get housing benefit or any other benefits if you have more than £16,000 in savings. Most people, the problem they've got with getting onto the housing ladder is they need to have a deposit, and saving the deposit's the hard bit. But if you've got enough money for a deposit, you wouldn't be entitled to get housing benefits anyway. Can I ask you again? You say a significant number. When you use the word significant, what do you mean by that number? Do you mean 100, 1,000? I mean, we've got 2.4 million households in housing associations, got 4 million who rented social housing in total. Is it 1 million people? How many people?
Firstly, it's a fair point you make about deposits, and we're doing two things about that. The first thing is we're reviewing the mortgage market overall in order to make sure that the appropriate approach towards loan-to-value ratios is taken by lenders. So, looking at the barriers that currently exist for first-time buyers and getting a deposit together. But the second thing is that we're also looking to see how we can use some of the existing saving vehicles that we have in order to ensure that people can specifically save more in order to qualify for a deposit and not have those savings disregarded, have those savings disregarded when it comes to benefit claims. There's a particular change that we're hoping to introduce there.
Do you think this is really going to make a difference? I'm going to come back. I'm sorry to keep asking you this question. I'm only asking a question again and again because I haven't got an answer. When you say a significant number of people will be affected by this, give me a range. You might not be able to say, it's 2027, but is it in the hundreds, in the thousands, in the hundreds of thousands? What is it? How many people do you think there are right now who have to claim housing benefit to pay their rent in their privately rented home, who are in a position, have enough savings that they're able to go and put a deposit on a property and they'd be able to buy a property? Because I don't think we're talking about virtually anyone in this country.
Well, there are more than 3 million people at the moment who claim housing benefit, and significant numbers of them are also claiming support for their rent through universal credit. But by definition...
how many of them are in a position to get a mortgage?
As a result of the changes that we are making, more. But
how many more? You said a significant number. How many? This is a major government announcement. This is about keeping Boris Johnson in power. This is about appealing to voters, changing people's lives. You must have a clue. It's your area of responsibility. You're the housing secretary. How many people do you think this policy will affect?
Julia, I don't know, and I can't know. And nobody can know precisely how many people will individually choose to take advantage of a policy. How many people will be listening to your show tomorrow? Tell me precisely.
I'm not in charge of running the country, deciding what people can and can't do.
But you're in charge of...
I'm just a jobbing hack.
The point I'm making, I think gently, is that...
you don't know. You've introduced a policy and you don't know who it's going to affect.
Julia, you're a formidable interrogator, and you're badgering me.
I'm asking a basic question.
In order to come up with a figure, but by definition, that figure could only be a guesstimate.
Give us a guesstimate.
Do you
think this is an unreasonable question? There's a government policy. How many people will it affect? It's a reasonable question. It's not badgering.
No, it's not. It's a silly question, Julia.
It's a silly question.
Yes, it is.
How many people will a government policy affect? It's a silly question.
Yes, because the nature of the question suggests that there is some secret figure that we have that we're hiding.
No, I don't want you to hide it. I'm asking how many people will be affected by it. This is the first major policy announcement from the Prime Minister after facing a vote of no confidence and winning it on Monday night. I'm thinking there's going to be some meat on the bones. We know there's a massive crisis, cost of living crisis. Lots of people in cost of living crisis even before this problem because they can't afford their mortgages, their rents. People can't afford to get homes. And the solution to this is we're going to allow people on benefits to get mortgages. I'm asking how many people do you think this will affect?
There are 3 million people who are in receipt of housing benefit, as I mentioned.
OK, we're not going to get further. I'm going to ask you also about Rwanda. These flights, first one of taking channel migrants to Rwanda to apply for asylum there, possibly be resettled there, due to take off next Tuesday. Legal challenges coming in thick and fast. Do you think that flight will take off? Do you think it will ever take off?
Yes.
Why do you think you're going to win those legal challenges?
Because the Home Secretary is pursuing the right policy.
Pursuing the right policy, but if it's going to be constantly challenged and judicial reviews even included, then it can be the right policy, but if it's never actually enacted, it won't be the right policy, will it?
Law is going to do what law is going to do.
Well, you're a former Justice Secretary. Do you think they'll win?
No.
You think eventually... How long do you think it will take? Any idea?
That's a matter for the judges.
So, I mean, is this really about the government basically wanting to stand up to, the lefty human rights lawyers who are, well, I suppose, against the will of the British people who really don't want these people staying in this country?
No, it's about making sure that we have a safe and humane migration policy which breaks the business model of people smugglers and at the same time safeguards our borders and at the same time make sure that we can be confident about welcoming, as we have, 60,000 people from Ukraine who are fleeing persecution.
OK, Michael Gove, really appreciate you joining us. Levelling Up and Housing Secretary, thank you very much indeed. A very quick chance to say quick goodbye. We've got like 5 seconds. I'm so sorry, Ali Miraj. I know you've been listening. In fact, no, stay on after the break so we can finish our conversation with you as well. I'm going to be talking to Lisa Nandy, Michael Gove's opposite number, up next. This is Talk Breakfast.
On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 9.
Good morning, I'm Emily Rose Adams. The Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove, has told Talk TV that the cost of living crisis is painful for families, but said we have to get inflation under control. The average cost of filling up a family car is expected to have reached £100 for the first time, with official figures released later today. While former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith has told us the world's over-reliance on Russian oil and gas is partly to blame.
We and other countries over the last number of governments decided that it didn't matter and we could just buy energy from anywhere, and we stopped producing our own energy. We're sitting on North Sea oil and gas, and we also have shale gas reserves here in the UK. So it's time for us to start thinking seriously about even going for net zero. You're going to need gas well into past that. We've got to start producing our own.
Boris Johnson set to announce today that lower-paid workers can use their housing benefits to obtain mortgages and buy homes. It's part of new measures to boost home ownership, with the Prime Minister also expected to extend the right to buy to those who currently rent from housing associations. Energy watchdog Ofgem has found that thousands of customers who lost power during Storm Arwen were provided with an unacceptable service. Nearly 1 million homes were cut off after winds of up to 98 miles per hour battered parts of the UK last November, and around 4,000 were still affected for over a week after Arwen. The US House of Representatives has voted to raise the minimum age for buying semi-automatic guns from 18 to 21 after officials heard testimony from an 11-year-old survivor of last month's school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. But the bill's highly unlikely to pass through the US Senate and become law. And an overseas spokesman for the Republican Party, Greg Swenson's told Talk TV that existing laws should be enforced before new ones are passed.
There are plenty of gun laws on the books which are not being enforced. If laws were enforced and people didn't fear for their lives going out in the street, perhaps they wouldn't be buying guns, but it's their right to defend themselves.
And a vigil's been held outside the Brazilian embassy in London this morning for a British journalist missing in the Amazon rainforest. Dom Phillips and his guide disappeared on Sunday, and it's understood he'd been threatened before going missing. Authorities are now using helicopters to search for the pair, but Brazilian football icon Pelé has urged a stronger response. And England and Man City star Jack Grealish is now a principal ambassador for Special Olympics GB. English football's most expensive player said he wants to create a positive change for a cause close to his heart. The charity provides year-round training and competition for children and adults with intellectual disabilities. And now it's time for today's weather.
Business sponsors Talk TV weather.
Hello, I'm Nazanin Gaffer. Wet and windy weather from the west over the next few days. We are seeing the remnants of Tropical Storm Alex heading towards northern parts of the UK through Friday and Saturday. It's going to bring very windy conditions there. And interestingly, over the next few days, we are also going to see high or very high pollen levels due to the fact that it's going to turn increasingly windy, but also temperatures are going to be rising, especially across southern areas. And we've seen quite a lot of rain recently. As a result, that means there's a lot of grass about, and lots of grass pollen levels are going to be high too, mainly across England and Wales. So for today, we are starting off mostly fine and dry, but out towards the southwest, it's already cloudy with some patchy outbreaks of rain. Cloudy across parts of the north as well, brighter further south. That band of rain will be moving its way eastwards through today, mainly reaching central and western parts of the UK, where it will be mostly cloudy with some patchy outbreaks of rain. But across eastern Scotland and eastern parts of England, it looks mostly fine and bright. Then for Friday and for Saturday, as I mentioned, we are going to see the remnants of Tropical Storm Alex approaching northern parts of the UK. It's going to bring very windy conditions across these areas, choppy waters, gales likely around parts of the coast, but calmer across parts of the south, mainly dry and bright.
Sunday Times Culture sponsors Talk TV weather.
Danny in Ipswich, you're on the air. Danny, good morning.
I'm sitting here with my little Chihuahua dog on the sofa.
What a ridiculous thing to say. You do talk nonsense. Get to the point. So you don't like Boris Johnson, right?
No, I do not.
Good morning to you. It's Thursday the 9th of June. You're watching Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley Brewer, on Talk TV. We are live from the Talk Radio studios. Coming up, the average family car now costs £100 to fill up with petrol after the biggest daily price jump in 17 years yesterday. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson will announce today that lower-paid workers will be allowed to use their housing benefits to buy their own homes in an extension to the Right to Buy scheme. And the first flight to Rwanda to deport Channel migrants could face long delays. It's due for next Tuesday. But lawyers have now launched major legal challenges. 9:05 is the time. This is Talk Breakfast. Thank you so much for your company this morning. Whether you are listening on Talk Radio or you are watching on Talk TV, it's great to have your company. And I very naughtily kept Ali Miraj, who's political commentator, has been joining me since 6:30. We've basically locked him in the studio to keep him here, to give his tuppence worth on my interview with Michael Gove and my interview I'm just about to do with Lisa Nandy, his shadow as Shadow Levelling Up and Housing Secretary. Ali, thank you so much for staying. Just before we get to Lisa, Extraordinary interview, I think, with Michael Gove. Annoyingly only on audio, not on video, but he may well be grateful for that. He told me that I asked him how many people are going to be affected by this housing benefit change, because if you're on housing benefit, you're on low income. How on earth are you going to be able to afford to pay a mortgage? And he said a significant number. And I asked him again, what is that number? Even to the nearest 1,000 or nearest 100,000, he wouldn't give me one. Then he said, I don't know. He told me I was badgering him, and it was a silly question. Is it a silly question to ask how many people a government policy might affect?
Well, look, I think he broadly said 3 million, and you were quite right to push him, Julia, on this. It's a major government policy announcement. Obviously, he's not going to know down to the individual person.
No, of course not.
But broadly, you would have thought so. But he said something really interesting, which was that the government's going to try and look at the loan-to-value ratios that are advanced by mortgage providers to allow people to buy their own homes. Do you remember the subprime crisis in the US, where people were getting loans above 100% of the value of their homes, and where that ended?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and we're all
Remember
still
that?
paying for that right now,
Yeah.
indeed. Well, it's coming up to 9 Let's talk to Lisa Nandy, Labour MP and Shadow Levelling Up and Housing Secretary, opposite number to Michael Gove, we just spoke to. Good morning to you, Lisa.
Hello, good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for your help in joining us. I want to talk about cost of living, but I want to ask about those housing questions first. That's your area of responsibility, of course. 7 times I asked Michael Gove how many people he thought would be affected by a policy which would allow those on housing benefit payments to help buy their homes, make monthly mortgage payments, which are currently not allowed to do. This is part of this announcement from the Prime Minister today, extending right to buy. 7 times the answer came there, none. Do you think this policy makes sense? Do you think this policy will affect a lot of people?
I think this is a back of an envelope strategy that the government has come up with to get themselves out of a hole. And I think the reason that Michael Gove couldn't answer that question is because I suspect he didn't know anything about this until late last night, and he's probably scrabbling around to try and work out how on earth it's going to work. That may be why he was only on audio. He may have been scribbling away trying to make the figures add up. There are real problems with this policy. The first is that the government has got to get lenders on board. If you remember, Julia, when they decided they were going to make it easier for people who lived in blocks of flats after the Grenfell tragedy to get mortgages, they said that you didn't need a fire safety certificate if you lived in a block that was less than 18 metres. And the mortgage lenders said, yes, you do. So it had precisely zero impact. And then there are all the problems that you described, like the fact that if you're on universal credit, you're not allowed to have more than 16,000 in savings. And the reality is most people don't have any at all. Mortgage lenders will be saying to people, well, where's your deposit? So if the practical barriers are still there by the time Michael Gove emerges in the House of Commons in a few hours' time, I think the reality is that this will help absolutely nobody at all.
That was my first thought. Again, not as a party political point, but just when a policy is announced, whether it costs money or doesn't cost money, and any policy actually will cost money because there's bureaucracy involved in it, I want to know who it's going to affect. Particularly also with the mortgage lenders, you can change any policies you want. At the end of the day, the mortgage lenders are private businesses. They will decide whether they want to give people a mortgage, and I'm not sure many of them are keen to give people on very low wages who can't afford their rent at the current time, when they won't even give mortgages to an awful lot of people right now who can easily pay their rent but just haven't got the ability to scrape together that deposit at the same time. And what about also this plan to extend the right to buy not just from council tenants but to housing association tenants? There are more housing association tenants than social housing tenants in total now, 2.4 million compared to 1.6 in council homes, because so many of them have been sold off. Do you think that's going to be a popular policy? Is it one that we should be pursuing?
Well, on the government's own estimate, it'll help quite a small number of people. They ran a pilot on this in 2018 in the Midlands and estimated that it would probably help around 17,000 families a year to achieve home ownership for about 10 years. That is obviously very good news for those families. The problem is the same pilot also found that half of the homes that were sold weren't replaced, and those that were replaced were lower quality and more expensive. We've got 1 million people on the social housing waiting list at the moment. We're short of 1.5 million homes in this country. We've got a housing crisis, and the risk is that while potentially helping a very small number of families, the policy that the government is proposing will actually make things worse for most people.
The answer
what we
to
really need.
I was going to say, the answer to all of this is building more houses. We just need to build more. We've got a massive, massive increase in demand, not least to things like immigration policies, which your party has put forward in government and carried on under Tory governments. We've got old people living longer, more separated families, people living alone for longer. We just need more homes. All of these policies, they're all just tinkering around the edges. We just need to build more homes, don't we?
I think that's right, and I think Michael Gove privately would accept that, even if publicly he's been sent out to defend this today. One of the things that he has done, in fairness, that is very positive, is come forward with a pot of funding to enable brownfield sites to be developed. At the moment, we've got this crazy situation where developers are eyeing up greenbelt and greenfield sites because brownfield sites can't be brought back into use, the contaminated land and other issues. But the government needs to focus on measures like that to speed up getting that money out into communities and to councils so it can be spent so that we can actually get that supply of homes coming forward. And you are right, in the end, there are other measures that the government can take, but all of it is just tinkering unless we increase the supply of affordable housing.
The housing issue is also, it does actually leach into the cost of living crisis we've got. We've seen the price of filling up a family car with diesel. It's already gone over £100. With petrol, it's now hitting £100 today. 2 pence rise yesterday. In just one day, the cost of living crisis is hitting everybody. Even if you don't own a car, you're going to be affected by the fuel prices being passed on by the people who supply and make every single thing that you buy, whether it's milk or whether it's a new dress for a Saturday night. What should the government be doing? Lots who were critical of Boris Johnson on Monday night and voted against him in the vote of confidence, saying tax cuts are the answer. Would you agree?
Well, we've got the highest level of taxes now for 70 years, and we're the only major economy that is putting up taxes on working people in the middle of an inflation crisis. So we've said for a long time, do not bring in the national insurance hike, and we've said to the government we think they should spike that hike as part of an emergency budget to try and get money back into people's pockets. There are other things that the government could do as well. I mean, one of the really big problems that we've got is that the government did take some action to cut fuel duty, which we supported, but many of the retailers then decided not to pass that fuel duty cut onto their customers. The business secretary wrote to them and asked them to do it. As far as I know, they didn't even bother to reply. The government should be coming down like a ton of bricks on those retailers who are holding on to that money and not getting it to the customers where it was intended to go.
I mean, this is the thing. People are facing these great difficulties. It's a key issue for most people. I know when we get people messaging into the show, this is the number one issue. And it's not just people on the very, very lowest incomes. It's people across the board who are absolutely horrified by their daily costs going up. You mentioned a number of things, and a lot of people may be supporting a number of those, but the OECD report is predicting that the UK is going to have the worst growth among the G20 richest countries in the world, other than Russia, which is facing economic sanctions over its invasion of Ukraine. Why do you think we have got the worst growth?
Because we're one of the most regionally unequal countries in the world, and in that scenario, even the winners are losing. The reason that people in London particularly are affected by cripplingly high housing costs, which knocks their disposable income from the highest in the country to middle of the ranks, is because we are failing to invest in large parts of the country and the potential and the assets that we have. And so the economy is not able to fire on all cylinders. It's holding the whole country back. Yesterday, new figures were released by the ONS, which were shocking about the way in which the gap is growing between London and the South East and all other regions post-pandemic. It's really short-sighted for the government to write off large swathes of the country by axing investment in things like rail and buses, when that is what businesses need to have in place in order to invest and get those good jobs back into the economy and get us growing again.
Can I also ask you about these Rwanda deportation flights, effectively? Channel migrants coming across this country, illegally entering the country, claiming asylum. As we know, Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, wants them to be flown to Rwanda for not just reprocessing, but possibly resettlement as well, if they're judged to be legitimate. The first flight's due to leave next Tuesday, but we've seen a whole host of legal challenges, including a call for a judicial review of the policy, an injunction to halt that flight, and even a trade union representing Border Force staff has got involved, along with a load of human rights lawyers, organisations and charities for refugees to try and stop this. Do you think that flight should be stopped?
I mean, I think the policy should be stopped. I don't think it should take a legal challenge for the government to work out that not only is this unethical, but it's unworkable and it's completely unaffordable. It's absurd at a time when people are struggling to keep their heads above water that the government is proposing to spend over £30,000 per person to send Ukrainian refugees, Afghan refugees over to Rwanda. They spent £120 million so far, and they haven't
we spent
taken
40 grand a year housing these people, for goodness sake. This will save us money in the long run. Not only will it be cheaper than the cost of actually looking after these people in this country right now, but if it does deter people, because they go, hold on a minute, if I arrive in the UK, I got picked up on my little dinghy, I'm going to be shipped off to Rwanda, I'm not going to end up in the UK anyway, then we'll be saving money.
Well, it didn't work in Israel. Israel tried exactly the same.
It worked
policy.
in Australia,
and all it did
worked
was
in Australia.
People smugglers. We should be taking action to disrupt those people smuggling rings. I mean, just to give you one example, Julia, it is absurd that it's still legal to advertise on social media. These people smugglers are able to advertise their routes and their services on social media. We've tried to get the government to clamp down on that. They refuse. We should be taking action.
I'm not sure how the government clamps down. They're getting this information in other countries. I'm not sure we're in charge of what advertising people, what people tweet in France or wherever. The problem is that Labour Party might disagree with this particular policy, but what is your alternative?
Well, first thing you've got to do is have safe routes for people who have a legitimate claim for asylum to come here. We've just seen what has been happening, unfolding in front of our eyes in Ukraine, and the opening up of homes of people across this country. Huge generosity of spirit across Britain.
Those aren't people coming to make their lives here. Those are people who need to have somewhere to live while the countries at war has been invaded by Russia. That's not the same as economic migrants and those coming from a whole host of countries across Africa and the Middle East who want to come and live here for good.
There are other routes for economic migrants. We have a responsibility towards people who are fleeing persecution in fear of their lives, who would otherwise face torture or perhaps death if they were returned to the countries that they came from.
Perfectly safe in France right now.
Since the Second World War, and for good reason.
They're in France. They're perfectly safe. Lisa, we'll have to leave it there. Lisa Nandy, Shadow Housing Secretary at Labour MP, thank you very much for joining us. Very quick word from Ali Merj, just on that issue. I just don't think Labour's got a leg to stand on this one. They're not offering an alternative other than open the borders.
Well, Lisa Nandy's very fluent and very impressive, but has got no answers. Not only to that, but also on tax. I never thought I'd see the day when Labour is outflanking the Tories on the right on tax cuts. I mean, they were opposed to Rishi Sunak's increase in corporation tax from 19 to 25%. Yeah. They're against the NI increase of 1.2. Who's going to pay for the 6 million waiting list? That is a 12 billion cut to the NHS funding every year. Where's it going to come from, Julia?
This is the problem, isn't it? Everyone wants tax cuts, it would seem, but everyone also wants more spending. Do we need to be more honest?
You can't square the circle. Yes, we do need to be more honest.
Voters need to be more honest about it all as well. But we can't have everything.
Exactly.
The European countries that have massive better services than we have, they pay a heck of a lot more tax than us.
That's exactly the point. But at the moment, the Labour Party is calling for lower personal tax, lower business tax. Where's all this money going to come from to fund this?
Absolute pleasure having your company this morning. Thank you very much, Dee. We're going to talk about working from home. All part of the problem up next. This is Talk Breakfast. Good morning to you. This is Talk Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley Brewer. Thank you very much indeed for your company. A lot of feedback coming in about that interview with Michael Gove, the Levelling Up and Housing Secretary. I asked him 7 times how many people are going to be affected by this government policy announcement from the Prime Minister. He's going all the way to Lancashire to make an announcement about extending the right to buy scheme, including for people who are on housing benefit, to be able to use that housing benefit for their mortgage, even though, I mean, you're not even able to claim housing benefit if you have got less than £16,000 or more than £16,000 in savings. If you've got those sort of savings, then you might be able to get a mortgage. But I asked how many people. He kept saying it was a silly question. He said it was a significant number. Then he said he didn't know and has asked me, really, how could you predict anything in the future? I mean, government policies being announced, no idea how many people will be affected. I don't think that's a silly question, but I'm old-fashioned like that. 9:22 is the time. Let me bring you some more of your messages coming in thick and fast as well about the cost of living. We also brought that up with both Michael Gove and Lisa Nandy, his opposite number in Labour. The price of a tank of petrol for a family car hitting £100 today. I'm asking how that will affect you. It's already hit over 100 for those of us who are diesel drivers. 2 wheels, 1 leg says, fortunately, I have a little slack in my budget. So I've stopped eating out altogether. No pub lunches, takeouts or cheeky coffees. Just about balancing the books, but I appreciate not everyone has that fat to trim. Sylvia says everything will now go up in price. The government needs to reduce the tax on fuel now. Christopher says, disgusting. But as usual, we will just pay it, myself included. I would love to know how the French get things done. They would be blocking the motorways by now. This is indeed what they do, as we saw with the Gilets jaunes, managing to keep those increases down. Orville says, cut the fuel on tax. That will help with inflation. I'm done with this government now. They're doing nothing for low-paid workers. Well, to be fair, Rishi Sunak a few weeks ago did make major announcements, extra money. The lowest pay, the very, very lowest pay, are going to be benefiting to the tune of £2,000 a year, £2,000 extra on the highest paid. There's no doubt at all on the independent analysis that there has been, I mean, late, admittedly, but better late than never, that help. Chris, though, equally cynical. I think we need Rishi Sunak to announce a pitiful fuel duty tax freeze and then do a badly staged photo op where he tries to fill up someone else's car like a normal person. Ouch. Volt Boy says all the petrol owners will not so smug anymore. Petrol's 4p over diesel at my local fuel station. And Kakura says it won't be long before the fuel courts implement pay before you pump policies to combat all the people filling up and driving off without paying. And a billion-strong army, Brian, says, I paid £70 yesterday to get me to work, but for how long? Now, this message I find is very bizarre. Newsmonger says, they cut fuel duty by 5p a litre just recently. I drive a small 3-cylinder Hyundai i10 and it's very economical to run. I only have to fill up once a month. I see so many big fancy gas guzzler cars and SUVs in supermarket car parks. Do they really need these? No sympathy from me. I'm sorry, but if you're only filling up once a month, you just don't drive your car very often. Lucky old you, or you live very near your workplace or whatever. Actually, there are millions of people who have to drive a very long way to get to and from work or for their job. They don't have a choice. And yes, they do need to have a bigger car than a small Hyundai. But, there we are. Coming up to 9:25, let's talk right now about all the people who are probably not driving to and from work because they're working from home. A new study shows that 75% of Londoners believe they won't go back to commuting every day. 60% of Londoners are still working from home at least once a week. Yeah, I know it's all very London-centric, but the London market does drive everything economically in this country. Let's talk to Neil Carberry. He's Chief Executive of the Recruitment and Employment Federation. Good morning to you, Neil.
Morning, Julia. How are you?
Very well indeed. Thanks for joining us. I mean, I'm still amazed by the number of people who are working from home and seem very, very happy about it. I couldn't wait to get back to the office. Do you think this is going to continue forever?
I think some form of it will continue forever, but I think what's important about the survey you just cited is it's not people working from home all the time. So 75% of Londoners are saying they won't go back 5 days a week. Well, they'll work from home maybe 1 day a week, maybe 2, maybe 3. I think that hybrid working is going to be really common in any business where you are to do some of your tasks doesn't really matter. So I think we'll see companies in service industries, of course London's really big in service industries, say come into the office 3-4 days a week, we'll do all the group work then. If you've got something to write, you've got a bid to get together for something we're bidding for,
You've got a presentation, then you're going to... The thing is, this is something, again, this is a report, into London workers. And again, so London is very big on the service industry, but it's very much also middle-class workers. When I was a waitress, I couldn't say, I'll be working from home on Friday, because I'm just going to serve people their steak and chips from home. If I'm working in an Amazon factory or millions, working as a tax driver, millions of different jobs can't be done from home, as we saw during the pandemic when middle-class people stayed at home being very virtuous, and working-class people brought them their stuff at home. This is a policy that just benefits the middle classes. The trouble is, people working from home has a knock-on effect on everyone else, doesn't it? On railways, on the tickets, we're going to have to pay there because not enough people are on the railways. On the retail, the hospitality, all of the shops selling sandwiches and coffees, the knock-on effect, the cleaners, the knock-on effect on the economy is huge.
Well, I mean, Julia, I never thought I'd heard you defend a command economy. As free marketeers, we should let people do what they want to do to make money. I think there's a couple of things I pick up.
Do they make money? But there we are.
Here's a couple of things I want to pick up. Firstly, there are plenty of working class people in service industries. Having a job in an office in a call centre is not a middle class job. So I think it's much more about which sectors you are in. Yeah. And certainly companies where they have some office staff and some staff out on the road are having to think very carefully about getting this right, because it's obviously not particularly fair to say to your field staff you're out every day, and you can't then turn around to your office staff and say come in 2 days a week. So what the best companies are doing is making a decision based on their individual needs and trying to be as flexible as they can, because that is absolutely helping people to hire.
Yeah, I understand that. It's a market where employees can almost pick and choose. But I think those people say, well, it must be working well for all these companies because they're allowing people to do this. I think, though, it's working well for the managers as well. And no one's really going to notice until the fact that actually no one's getting anything done. I like Digby Jones. His rule is, if you want to work from home, that's fine, but you can't do it on a Monday or a Friday.
So I worked for Digby for a long time, and I have great respect for him.
I feel a butt coming.
I think Digby's approach to how businesses run is one that we've moved on from over the last few decades. My sense of this is that what companies are learning is they have to be really clear about what they need to be successful, and I think there absolutely are some companies who have moved and realised that they haven't been clear enough about what they need to be successful. I actually do think that companies need to schedule more people's in-office time. No business is interested in having an office that's used 3 days a week, not 5 days a week. And we'll see lots of that over the next year. Okay, the most important thing is fronting up what you need as a business and offering your employees
getting the job done. If working from home works so well, we would not have all the delays and all the public sector roles we've got right now. Great to talk to you. Thank you very much, Neil Carberry. Let's get an update on the headlines now. This is Talk Breakfast.
If my friends had to describe me, I don't know, maybe you should ask them. But I think, or I hope they would say, I am the life and the soul of the party. I'll arrive, things get going, things get done. I'm a doer. They'd say that. They'd also say I'm glass half full. I look for the positive things in people's lives, in what's going on. But also, I think they'd say I'm passionate. I'm passionate about what I do, what I support, what I believe in.
This is Talk TV News.
Good morning, I'm Emily Rose Adams. Some breaking news in the last half an hour, and a government review has found the age at which people can legally buy tobacco products in England should rise every year. It's part of government plans to be smoke-free and eradicating smoking by 2030, which would mean less than 5% of the population being smokers. Well, the review was commissioned by the Health Secretary Sajid Javid last year, but ministers are reportedly split on the plans. The Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove has told Talk TV that the cost of living crisis is painful for families, but said we have to get inflation under control. It's as new figures in the last few moments show the average cost of filling up a family car has reached £100 for the first time. Well, Michael Gove's told us it was a tough time for families, but is down to a number of external pressures.
I don't for a moment deny the fact that with fuel prices increasing, with food prices increasing as well, it is tough out there. This is the consequence of inflationary pressures. The war in Ukraine is a principal factor. It's also the case that some of the strains caused as a result of the COVID pandemic.
Boris Johnson set to announce today that lower-paid workers can use their housing benefits to obtain mortgages and buy homes. It's part of new measures to boost home ownership, with the Prime Minister also expected to extend the right to buy to those who currently rent from housing associations. And energy watchdog Ofgem has found thousands of customers who lost power during Storm Arwen were provided with an unacceptable service. Nearly 1 million homes were cut off after winds of up to 98 miles per hour battered parts of the UK last November, and around 4,000 were still affected for over a week after Arwen. That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
Good morning to you. This is Talk Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley Brewer. Thank you very much indeed for your company. 9:32 is the time. Coming up, we're going to be talking about a bid to raise the smoking age to 21. Currently, it's 18. It was previously 16, but raising it to 21. So for 3 years of being an adult, you won't be allowed to buy a perfectly legal product. I'm not a smoking fan, but how can we really tally that with our fundamental freedoms? Well, we've had most of them taken away the last couple of years. Well, what do we know? We're going to be talking about that coming up. Also, just in the last couple of moments, official figures on the cost of petrol in the fuel courts have just been released. And, yeah, as we've been predicting, been talking about all morning, and you've been tweeting in and texting me in all morning as well, the price of filling up an average family car with a petrol has now topped £100. Lots of you getting in touch. I'm asking you how this will affect you. Lots of people absolutely rely on their cars. I've said this a million times, and I'm going to keep saying it. One of the big issues we've got is an awful lot of policies in this country are made by people who live in London, like I do. I own a car, barely ever use it. I probably fill up, I mean, I'm not even joking you, once every 2 months, if that. Because we don't use the car much, because we've got all these alternative public transport. That is not the case. The vast majority of people in this country use their cars to get to and from work, need to get their kids to and from school. No, they don't live within walking distance of these things, and they rely on their cars. And the cost of fuel is, I mean, basically almost doubled for an awful lot of people. I'm asking you how you're going to cope. And this is a great message from Annie G, and I've no other people who've said this. Someone I know said it wouldn't affect him at all, as he only puts £20 in at a time. Where do you even start with that? Where do you even start of that? Matthew says simply, I have to pay more for petrol. That's how it will affect me. Chris says, I'm still lucky my commute is relatively short. I feel for families whose parents don't have a short one. Crippling. Some will become prisoners in their own home as they'll not be able to afford to go anywhere. Tim says the government currently takes 80 to 90 pence per litre in fuel duty, and VAT fuel duty is 57.9 per litre when people buy petrol and diesel at the pump. On top of this, fuel is subject to VAT of 20%. Peter says simply, I will drive less. It's as simple as that. And Terry says, already cost that last week for my diesel car. Again, it was over £100, £102, I think, already this week. For some, it could be the tipping point to make them quit their jobs, find work closer to home, as it would be too expensive to commute. Paul asks simply, what currency is that? And Fuzzy Pants, great Twitter name, says, my car is now parked up until I stop getting ripped off. I suggest everyone does the same and shove it up them. Yeah, but it's all very well, but you haven't got the option. You've got to get to work. You're only going to be shoving it up yourself. I don't know if there'll be Ofcom complaints about that, but I think you know what I mean. Coming up to 9:35, let's right now talk about the NHS. We had the Health Secretary on yesterday, Sajid Javid. As always, it's always so frustrating. I can feel your frustration watching and listening when I've got an interview booked, they're running late in a previous interview, and you basically get, 4 or 5 minutes to have a conversation, and there's so much to talk about, you don't get to go into things in more detail. But we did see an announcement from the government that we're going to uphold this review. Massive change in bureaucracy and management and leadership in the NHS to try and, basically bring it into what the Health Secretary called the Netflix era, as opposed to the blockbuster era, bearing in mind they're still using fax machines in the NHS en masse. Anyone who's had to deal with the NHS will know that actually the care you get will be great when you get it. You have to actually get through the bureaucracy to get it. But one of the things that is going to be included in this is the NHS is being told to cut diversity and inclusion jobs as part of this landmark reform. And the Health Secretary called for urgent action to take on the war on waste and wokery amid record NHS spending. Well, let's talk about whether or not this will actually happen with Matthew Lesh. He's Head of Public Policy at the Institute of Economic Affairs, the free market think tank. Good morning to you, Matthew.
Good morning, Julia.
We're going to have a cut in diversity jobs at the NHS. I mean, given that we've actually got people working in the NHS who are NHS trusts advertising for jobs in, decent, really decent salaries, to be net zero compliancy officers and diversity officers and HR officers and the like, do you think this is ever going to happen?
Look, I think time will tell about whether or not it happens. In the grand scheme of things, this is pretty small change in the NHS system. I mean, it is a waste of money to have people going around doing diversity and equity when what you really need are people who can manage a hospital successfully.
You and your crazy thinking, Matthew, it'll never catch on.
No. Good management techniques never catch on. What I find so fascinating about this debate, often we do assume that the NHS is overmanaged, there's too much middle management, there's too much bureaucracy. It doesn't necessarily set up to the facts. The NHS actually only has about 2% of its staff are middle managers, compared to around 9% across the general economy. So what we've had time and time again is governments have come in and have said there's too many managers, we can fix the NHS by having fewer managers. That often actually just means putting more burden onto doctors and nurses to do some of the paperwork.
Yeah.
So I think there needs to be kind of a smarter thinking when it comes to this particular issue. And the government doesn't necessarily know best, kind of top down, it's precisely the nature of managers that you require for hospital.
Yeah.
But inevitably that happens in the NHS.
No, indeed. I mean, this is part of this this centralised structure we've got. And we saw, of course, an awful lot of middle managers and involved in the last formation of the NHS, because it gets reformed every 10 years. One thing we never do is actually just hire more people to do the actual doctoring and nursing and scanning and all of that. But they did that, and then they sacked a load of people. They got massive payoffs, redundancies, big payoffs. 2 days later, they're on a higher day rate to come back and work as consultants, which I think a lot of us found very troubling. And they were trying to ban that. Carries on, we know, it's this day and age. But the key thing is we know that there are a lot more people being hired. The Guardian has the most wonderful public sector jobs adverts. And again, it's all about diversity officers. It's all about, net zero officers. People who don't actually, with all due respect, add anything in terms of output. They're just basically stopping other people getting their job done most of the time. And I completely understand you need to have people, HR, if there's a grievance, if someone's being bullied, racism or sexism, you need to have people to deal with that. But there's been an explosion in these people. And it's now an industry, isn't it? And yet these people don't actually have to have a particular track record in getting anything done. We've seen in the Treasury recently an extraordinary piece, I think it was the Telegraph, that had some internal documents, basically, from whistleblowers, basically saying that 10% of their time as senior managers was they were told you must spend 10% of your time dealing with diversity issues. Trans issues or this or that, for your work appraisals. We're actually telling people, paid by the public sector, in the public sector by taxpayers, who've got a really important job to do, dealing with our economy and other things. Please spend 10% of your time doing something totally non-productive, and that is how you'll get ahead in this organisation. That is a disaster.
Yeah, it's totally a bizarre situation, particularly when it comes to civil service. I mean, the civil service is meant to be accountable to the government ministers. Many of them will go on the record talking about their anti-woke credentials, about how they don't think that this should be a priority, how they think it's divisive to focus excessively on issues like race, gender and sexuality, and that we should treat people as individuals and equally. But at the same time, literally the departments that they run are hiring all these people to do these jobs. So it just feels like a total failure for the ministers to actually grasp the departments. It seems to be kind of something quite structurally wrong. It's a very yes minister-esque, isn't it, Julia, where basically the civil servants just get on with whatever mumbo-jumbo they like. I don't know if you've seen this. The Home Office, for example, has got an insurgent group, an anonymous group of people who are trying to undermine the government's policy of sending people to Rwanda. Now, whatever you think about that particular policy, if you're a civil servant, your job is not to have your own political and policy positions. Yes. Your job is to implement the government's agenda. And if you're trying to push back against that agenda, you're fundamentally failing in your job. And I'm not sure you're cut up to be a civil servant. You should become an activist instead.
We're always being told about this amazing first-rate, civil service. And I mean, basically, they're all working from home as far as we can tell. The failures, I think we saw firsthand, which cost lives, where we had the Afghanistan withdrawal, where people were working from home, they weren't able to actually process anything because they couldn't access computers, but were still allowed to work from home. But also the NHS, these delays cost lives. People can't get appointments. I mean, I had to deal with, the bureaucracy of being sent appointments by paper, by letter. I kept saying, email me. I'm on email. It's the 21st century. And they kept sending me a letter. The letters would arrive after the day of the appointment or when the appointment's already been moved to another day. You can't get anyone to answer the phone. I got given email addresses that didn't exist on official headed notepaper. I mean, it's sort of like dealing with an organisation in the 1970s sometimes.
It is, and that's inevitably what happens when you've got a massive bureaucracy. This is I think, one of the fundamental issues with the NHS. It is too big and too complex. You know, again, over 1 million people work in that system. It's bigger than, you know, many organisations short of the People's Republic of China's army. The PRC's army, you know, is one of the fewer bigger organisations in the world. And of course, you're going to get these issues when you have that much, that many people, because you need bureaucracy to manage that many people, and then inevitably the bureaucracy just becomes inefficient and bloated and incompetent and lacks in coordination. And that's why you need to bring market mechanisms and competition into the system, so that there's actually proper incentives. You know, it's the reason why, you know, prices work really effectively is because they send signals about what to produce. But there's no prices. I mean, there are artificial prices in the NHS, but they're kind of made up. There's no real price kind of signals. There's no competitive pressures in the NHS. I think a good way to do it would be to give people vouchers so they could go in, if they're not getting a service from the NHS, they could go and use that voucher in wherever they like in the private sector. Give patients that choice. If the NHS is failing to deliver, take their money elsewhere.
We'll have to leave it there, Matthew. I'm so sorry. Matthew Lesh from Institute of Economic Affairs. Always good to talk to you. I hope you'll be back in the studio again soon as well. Up next, going to talk about raising the smoking age from 18 to 21. That's up next. This is Talk Breakfast. Good morning to you. This is Talk Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley Brewer. Thank you very much indeed for your company. And Mike Graham will be here to talk about what's happening on the Independent Republic of Mike Graham coming up at 10 o'clock. He'll be here just before then. Tell us what's happening. We'll try and get to more of your tweets still coming in about the problem of the fuel hitting £100 a day. If you want to, £100 a day, so £100 today if you want to fill up your car with petrol. Already hit that if you want to do it with diesel, but that's a typical family car. That 15 minutes ago, those official figures came out, not speculation. That is the typical average cost. We're going to be talking more about that, no doubt, for many days, weeks, indeed months to come. Don't forget, of course, Mike Graham will also be covering the Prime Minister's speech today, announcing this latest housing policy. If you didn't hear my interview with Michael Gove a little bit earlier, the Levelling Up and Housing Secretary, do have a look at our YouTube page and our Twitter feed, and indeed my Twitter feed, Julia HB1, where I asked Michael Gove 7 times how many people he thought were going to be affected by a policy allowing housing benefit claimants to use that money for their mortgages. And first of all, he said it was a significant number. He wouldn't give me anything even to the nearest 100,000, as if it would be more than a dozen people. And then he said he didn't know. And then he told me it was a silly question. So I'd love to know your thoughts. Do get in touch. Let me know what you think of that interview. First up, though, before we get to hear from Mike Graham, let's talk about smoking. I'm not a fan of smoking. I've got to be honest with you. I was delighted when they banned smoking in bars and restaurants. It finally became pleasant to spend time in them. I was an ex-barmaid and ex-waitress myself. I was absolutely thrilled for the people who work there. But it is still legal to smoke in this country. At the age of 18, raised from 16, certainly when I was a kid, you are allowed to buy and to smoke cigarettes. However, the government has today, a government-ordered review has recommended raising the legal age for buying cigarettes in England by 1 year every year. So that basically, initially, we would raise the smoking age to 21. That, and also adding on massive new taxes on tobacco companies. Well, let's talk about this with a man who I'm pretty sure would disagree with this. Simon Clark is director of Forest, the smokers' lobby group. Good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Lovely to talk to you, Simon. So, raising the legal age of smoking, not banning people who already smoke from smoking, basically saying you can't smoke till you're 21. Do you think that's a good plan or not?
No, I mean, we supported, 15 years ago when they raised the legal age of sale from 16 to 18, we supported that because it seemed perfectly logical to bring tobacco into line with alcohol. And at 18, people are legally adults. Now, raising it to 21, and of course they want to continue to raise it 1 year at a time, so we'll end up, 25-year-olds will be banned from buying tobacco, then presumably eventually 30-year-olds. This is clearly creeping prohibition. We all know what happens with prohibition. You end up with the product being forced, into the black market, into the hands of criminal gangs. They're the ones who will benefit. But at the same time, you're infantilizing young adults. Now, whether or not you approve of smoking, as you just said, tobacco is a legal product. And what often doesn't get mentioned is, although it's addictive, it can be addictive, millions of people get pleasure from smoking. Plus also many people smoke to relieve stress or anxiety, all sorts of reasons. So this continual attack on a legal product has gone way too far. We've seen it over the last 15 years, not just with the smoking ban. Of course, there are now calls to extend the smoking ban to outdoor areas where no non-smoker is at risk whatsoever.
I always thought the smoking ban in indoors areas, again, very much in support of that, because it does affect other people. There is a health risk of the passive smoking, but even if there wasn't a health risk, the fact that it's actually darn irritating to have to walk through other people's smelly clouds of smoke. I'm someone who can smell smoke on someone about 200 metres away, but the thing is, I do agree with your point here, though. If you're an adult, if something is legal to be sold in this country, the idea that at 18, 19 and 20 you're not allowed to buy it, but at 21 you are, is frankly an absurdity. So you're, as you say, infantilising adults in this country. But also the idea that it would raise and rise again and again. The idea is that this would stop young people smoking. We know that the vast majority of people who smoke started smoking before the age of 18. All of my friends who smoked started before the age of 18. And before the age of 16, most of them, when, of course, it was completely illegal for them to buy cigarettes. But they got a hold of them. They got older friends or someone else to buy them. As you say, there's a market in these things. And it seems to me that people are going to just turn to the black market and they're going to get a hold of these cigarettes anyway. But the big issue we do have is that, this is the only product that is sold in Western and every other country, which, used as instructed by its manufacturer, will kill you. The only people who don't die from smoking are people who die of something else first. Smoking is bad for you. One cigarette is bad for you. 10 cigarettes is worse for you. It's not the same as alcohol. You know, I know there's lots of counterclaims about this, but there's really no evidence that people who drink, say, one glass of wine a couple of days a week are going to die earlier. So there may well come a point when smoking does become illegal. The actual act of making and selling these cigarettes will be illegal. Do you think that is coming down the line?
Well, I hope not, because we know that prohibition doesn't work. I mean, there was an experiment with prohibiting alcohol in the United States in the 1920s, 1930s. That clearly didn't work. Look, put it in perspective. Smoking rates have been coming down for 40 or 50 years. And they will continue to come down over the next decade. What we don't want to see is smokers being forced, coerced, or bullied to give up. If they give up voluntarily, that's absolutely fine. And we will support government efforts to encourage smokers to switch to vaping, for example.
Yeah. I mean, actually, the biggest fall in cigarette smoking that we have seen wasn't actually from that ban. Was it 2007, wasn't it, when the ban on smoking indoors? I remember this. I was pregnant in 2006, and I couldn't go to watch any of the big football matches in the pub because of the smoke. But it's actually the introduction of vaping, people having an alternative. I know so many people who are avid smokers who turned to vaping and have found it a really, really good way of giving up smoking. And although vaping is not completely cost-free and health cost-free, it is a darn sight better for you than smoking is.
Well, vaping has empowered smokers to give up by giving them a choice, and a choice that they enjoy doing. But there are still many smokers who've tried vaping and they prefer to smoke, and they have every right to smoke. And people must respect their choice because, as I say, we're all adults. I don't smoke, but I enjoy drinking. I probably eat. I'm overweight, so I should definitely lose weight. But I don't want the government forcing me to lose weight or banning certain products which they decide are bad for me.
And this is the thing. I remember discussing this with you many, many years ago. You know, I've always been an avid anti-smoker. I certainly wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't, you know, be married to someone who smoked. I'd be horrified if my daughter smoked. I don't like people smoking in my home. But again, those are my choices, aren't they? I don't have to inflict those on other people when they're going about their own lives. But I was always someone who sort of, I don't like the, you know, I used to want the government to get involved on these things. And the more that they've encroached on the things that I like, you know, how much drinking should you do? What can you buy? Can you buy, you know, you're getting taxed for buying, you know, a chocolate cake or sweets and things, or takeaways. I've got more and more aware of, actually, we're all happy to have restrictions on things that other people do. It doesn't affect us. But when they come for us, and we are seeing that creep, aren't we, in terms of the nanny state and the controls on us, and we saw this, my God, during lockdown, that this idea that it's acceptable for the state to tell grown adults what they can do when it comes to legal products.
Indeed, and once you give politicians that power, they will always be looking for what they call the next logical steps. I'm afraid it continues. And we're seeing with these recommendations, there's talk about putting a tobacco levy on the tobacco companies of something like £700 million a year. Now, that's on top of the huge amounts of money the tobacco industry already contributes through corporation tax and so on. We know the cost will be passed on to the consumer, and the consumer is already contributing £11 billion a year in tobacco tax, which far exceeds the alleged cost of treating smoking-related diseases on the NHS. So again, where does it stop? And I'm afraid it won't stop, because a lot of that money will be used to basically pay for the anti-smoking industry. I mean, talk about a vested interest. They're campaigning for the tobacco industry to essentially keep them in jobs for the next 300 years.
I can only say that the biggest contribution that smokers make to our economy is that they die early and they don't claim their pensions for so long. Everyone needs to remember that is the crucial fact, rather than the taxes they pay. Look, you and I mean, again, we disagree on smoking, but I do agree in terms of infantilising a nanny state. I have to say, Simon Clark, Director of Forest, the Smokers Lobby Group, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. It's amazing how much you change your view on these things over the years as you get older and prefer people not to fiddle with the things that you like to do. 9:54 is the time. Delighted to say Mike Graham's in the studio.
Hello. I used to
smoke. Looking very dashing, by the way.
This is the final suit of the ones that I bought, and I'd forgotten actually what it was because it's been so long since I'd ordered it. By the time I picked it up, I was like, I couldn't remember what it was. It was rather
nice. Your fancy ordered suit.
It is very nice, isn't it?
Anyway,
very good. Yes. So I've got a message here from Philip Jackson, who is spotted on Junction 19 M6 unleaded petrol, £2.02 a litre. So it's now over £2.
It's just extraordinary.
I mean, it's incredible, isn't it?
Some people, we had someone tweeting earlier saying, well, I've got a cheap run around. I only fill up once a month. Sorry, I only fill it like once every 2 months because I don't use my car much. You obviously don't drive very far. People who work miles from work or for their work, they actually have to drive around.
A lot of people have to fill their tank maybe twice, 3 times a week.
Yes.
You know, so it's 300 quid.
I genuinely don't know how people are affording to do it.
No, I don't think they are. I think people are just going into more and more debt. It's incredibly difficult to understand why and when this is going to stop. I mean,
it's going to be a long time.
The government is going to have to do something, surely.
What else are you going to be talking about?
Well, we've got John Rentoul coming in. We're going to talk about the PMQs yesterday, where Sir Keir Starmer made another complete hash of actually nailing down Boris Johnson. I mean, Ian Blackford was better. He was actually quite funny.
Thanks.
You know, he was actually quite funny.
They've all been cheering for me.
Well, they've all been cheering for him. And also, of course, the whole business of the NHS and that incredible video, which shows that, you know, you're going to be waiting 7 hours to be seen by a doctor.
I mean, absolutely.
Just incredible.
And we're just getting used to it. It's just going to be the way things are, isn't it? It's going to be a brilliant show ahead. It always is. I'm done for another day, done for another week. JK, Jeremy Carr will be in tomorrow morning. I'll be back with you on Monday morning, bright and early, at 6:30 for your Talk Breakfast show. In the meantime, Mike Graham is up next with the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. I'm going to be texting with Michael Gove about that interview all day. I can just tell that's happening. Do have a listen. You haven't listened to it already. This is Talk Breakfast.